The universe operates on principles we understand: physics, chemistry, the fundamental laws of cause and effect. Starfleet has catalogued thousands of species, mapped countless star systems, and established protocols for nearly every conceivable anomaly. But what happens when something defies every sensor, every theory, every rational explanation? What happens when a being appears whose very existence challenges the foundation of everything we know about biology, energy, and the limits of possibility? The USS Enterprise NCC 1701D was conducting a routine personnel transport from the Federation Research Outpost on Epsilon Tauri 4. Lieutenant Morrison and her survey team had completed their geological assessment and were beaming back to the ship. Chief O'Brien stood at the transporter console, his fingers moving across the controls with practiced ease. The familiar hum of the transporter filled the room as 5 columns of shimmering light began to coalesce on the pads. Then the sensors screamed. "What the?" O'Brien's hands flew across the console as warning indicators flashed red across every display. "Bridge, we have a massive subspace disruption intersecting the transporter beam." On the bridge, Captain Jean-Luc Picard rose from his command chair, his expression instantly focused. "Report, Mr. Data." The android's fingers moved in a blur across his console. "Captain, a dimensional rift has opened directly within our transporter stream. The aperture is destabilizing rapidly. I am detecting exotic particles that do not correspond to any known phenomenon in our database. Can we complete the transport?" Commander Riker asked, moving to stand beside the captain. "Unknown, sir. The rift is pulling matter from another dimensional plane directly into our transporter buffer." Data's golden eyes flickered with the rapid processing of impossible data. "I am detecting an additional biosignature, one that should not exist. In the transporter room." O'Brien fought to maintain beam integrity as the entire system threatened to tear itself apart. Energy readings spiked beyond anything in his 15 years of experience. The transporter columns had split, 5 familiar patterns were forming alongside something else. Something that blazed across his sensors like a small sun. O'Brien to bridge. "We've got 6 people materializing instead of 5. The extra signature is off the charts. I've never seen anything like this." The column solidified. Lieutenant Morrison and her team stumbled slightly as they rematerialized, disoriented but intact. On the 6th pad, a figure took shape. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair and a build that suggested impossible strength. He wore a suit of blue and red, emblazoned with a distinctive symbol on his chest, a stylized S within a diamond shield. But it was his eyes that struck O'Brien most. Blue, clear, and filled with a combination of confusion and alert readiness that spoke of someone accustomed to crisis. The man swayed, catching himself against the edge of the transporter pad. For just a moment, something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps even vulnerability. Then he straightened, and O'Brien felt an instinctive wariness. This wasn't just another humanoid. Every instinct honed through years of service told him that much. "Sir, I'm going to need security in Transporter Room 3, O'Brien said quietly into his comm badge, never taking his eyes off the stranger. "And you might want to see this for yourself." The man's gaze swept the room, taking in the technology, the personnel, the very architecture of the ship with the speed of someone processing information at an extraordinary rate. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, but carried an undertone of barely controlled concern. "Where am I? What happened to the—" He paused, seeming to listen to something beyond normal human hearing. "This isn't Earth. This isn't my universe, is it?" Before O'Brien could respond. "His skeletal structure appears to be crystalline in nature. And he is emitting a low-level energy field that my sensors cannot fully categorize." "Is he dangerous?" Riker asked. "Unknown, sir. However, based on preliminary analysis, if this individual were to become hostile, our standard security measures would be inadequate." Picard touched his comm badge. Mr. Worf, escort our guest to Observation Lounge 4. No restraints unless he proves aggressive. I will meet him there personally. He paused, then added, and Mr. Worf, treat him as a diplomatic contact, not a prisoner. We don't yet know what we're dealing with, but I suspect hostility would be unwise. In the transporter room, Superman nodded slowly. Thank you, Captain. I appreciate the courtesy. He stepped down from the pad with fluid grace, and O'Brien couldn't help but notice that the deck plating didn't make the usual sound under his weight. It was as if the man was unconsciously controlling his mass, preventing the full force of his body from impacting the floor. As Worf led him toward the door, Superman paused, turning back to O'Brien. The people who were transporting with me, they made it through safely? Aye, sir. Lieutenant Morrison and her team are fine. Something in Superman's expression softened. Good. That's good. Then he followed Worf into the corridor, leaving O'Brien alone with questions that Federation science might not be equipped to answer. In his ready room, Picard stood before the window, looking out at the stars streaking past at Warp 6. Counselor Troi entered without announcement, as was her privilege. You've been monitoring his emotional state, Picard said without turning. Yes, Captain. He's confused, concerned, but remarkably controlled. There's no deception in him. He genuinely doesn't know how he arrived here. But there's something else. She hesitated. Lieutenant Worf materialized in the doorway with 2 security officers, phasers drawn but not aimed. The Klingon's tactical assessment was instantaneous and thorough. His eyes narrowed as he studied the stranger's posture, the way he held himself with the balanced readiness of a trained fighter. You will remain where you are, Worf commanded, his deep voice brooking no argument. Identify yourself. The stranger's hands rose slowly, palms outward in a universal gesture of peace. But O'Brien noticed something that made his blood run cold. When Worf's phaser had briefly tracked across the man's chest, the energy detection grid had shown a reflection signature. As if the weapon's targeting beam had bounced off skin that shouldn't be able to reflect anything. My name is Clark Kent, the stranger said carefully. Though most people where I come from know me as Superman. I don't know how I got here, but I promise you, I'm not a threat. I was flying over Metropolis when something pulled me, somewhere else. A tunnel of light and energy, and then I was in your transport beam. Superman, Worf repeated, his expression skeptical. That is not a name. It is a title. It's both, the man, Superman, replied. Look, I understand you have protocols for this kind of situation. I'm happy to cooperate with whatever security measures you need. But first, I need to know, where am I, and when am I? On the bridge, Picard listened to the exchange through the open comm channel, his eyes meeting Data's across the console. The android had been running continuous scans since the transport completed, and what he was finding clearly troubled him, as much as anything could trouble a being without emotions. Captain, Data said quietly, the biosignature from the additional subject is extraordinary. His cellular structure is absorbing energy directly from the ship's lighting systems. His muscle density is approximately 60 times that of a human baseline. He carries a tremendous sense of responsibility. And grief. Old grief, buried deep, but never forgotten. This is someone who has lost much and feels the weight of protecting others as a fundamental part of his identity. A hero, then. Perhaps the truest example I've ever encountered. Picard turned from the window. Then let us hope, Counselor, that our definition of heroism and his prove compatible. Because if Mr. Data's readings are accurate, we may have just encountered a being who could reshape the balance of power in the entire quadrant, whether he intends to or not. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Trek universe, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. Live long and prosper. The doors to Observation Lounge 4 opened, and Captain Jean-Luc Picard entered to find Superman standing before the window, silhouetted against the infinite canvas of stars. The man hadn't moved aggressively, hadn't tested his confinement. He simply stood, watching the universe pass by with an expression that Picard recognized, the look of someone far from home, wondering if they would ever return. "Mr. Kent," Picard said, his voice carrying the diplomatic warmth that had resolved countless first-contact situations. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard. Welcome aboard the Enterprise." Superman turned, and for the first time, Picard got a full measure of the man. There was power there, certainly, it radiated from him like heat from a star. But there was also something profoundly human in his eyes. Kindness. Concern. The bearing of someone who had carried impossible burdens and never set them down. "Captain Picard," Superman extended his hand. "I wish we were meeting under better circumstances." Picard shook it, noting the careful control in Superman's grip. The strength was there, he could feel it like a coiled spring, but it was restrained with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime learning not to break fragile things. The observation lounge had been designed for diplomatic encounters, with comfortable seating and a view of space that reminded visitors of the vastness they all shared. Picard gestured to a chair, but Superman remained standing, his gaze returning periodically to the stars streaming past. "You're traveling faster than light," Superman said quietly. "I can hear the engines, they're not like anything I've encountered. Not combustion, not fusion. Something that bends space itself around the ship." Picard's eyebrow rose slightly. "You can hear our warp engines? Through multiple decks and significant shielding?" "I can hear a lot of things, Captain. It's one of the abilities I have. Along with several others that I imagine your sensors have already detected." Superman finally turned fully to face him. "I'm not from your universe. I'm certain of that now. The stars are wrong, constellations I've memorized since childhood, completely different. And the technology level. You're centuries beyond where Earth was when I left." "When you left," Picard repeated carefully, settling into his own chair and gesturing again for Superman to sit. This time, the man complied, though Picard noticed he chose a position that kept the door in his peripheral vision, the instinct of someone accustomed to threats from any direction. "Perhaps you should start from the beginning, Mr. Kent. Help us understand who you are and how you came to be aboard my ship." Superman was silent for a moment, and Picard recognized the calculation happening behind those blue eyes. How much to reveal? How much to trust? The captain waited patiently. Rushing this would help no one. "My birth name is Kal-El," Superman began. "I was born on a planet called Krypton, in another universe entirely from this one. My parents, Jor-El and Lara, sent me to Earth as an infant when our world was dying. A planet called Krypton had a red sun, and its destruction was imminent. They placed me in a spacecraft that carried me across the... I believe we are about to examine the most remarkable biological specimen in Federation history. I'm a doctor, Data, not a xenobiologist studying a specimen. He's a patient. Of course, Doctor. My apologies." Data paused. "Though I believe you will find him to be both." The doors opened, and Clark Kent entered with Worf close behind. He offered Dr. Crusher a warm smile that seemed at odds with the tactical assessment Worf had undoubtedly been conducting during the entire walk from the observation lounge. "Dr. Crusher, I presume?" "That's right. Please, have a seat on the bio-bed. This shouldn't take long, just some basic scans to establish a medical baseline." Clark complied, settling onto the bio-bed with that same careful control she'd noted in his movements. As her medical tricorder swept over him, the device immediately began generating error messages. "That's odd," she muttered, adjusting the settings. "It's the cellular density," Clark offered. "Medical scanners tend to bounce off rather than penetrate. You might have better luck if you increase the scanning frequency to he rattled off a specific wavelength that made Data's eyes light up with interest. Beverly made the adjustment, and suddenly her tricorder flooded with data. Too much data. Cellular structures that shouldn't exist. Energy patterns that defied thermodynamics. A cardiovascular system that seemed to be powered by something other than biochemistry. "My God," she whispered. "You're a living fusion reactor." More or less. The yellow sun radiation converts directly to energy at the cellular level. It's why I can do the things I do. But the entropy alone should. She stopped, realizing she was thinking like a 24th century physician trying to analyze 31st century technology. Or perhaps technology from another universe entirely, operating on different fundamental rules. Data leaned in, studying the readings over her shoulder. "Doctor, look at his neurological patterns. The synaptic response time is approximately 12,000 times faster than human baseline. He processes information and reacts to stimuli at speeds that would allow him to perceive events unfolding in what we would consider frozen time. Which is how I can catch bullets," Clark said. "I don't actually move faster than them, well, sometimes I do, but mostly I just perceive them moving slowly enough to react." "Incredible," Beverly breathed. Then, remembering her medical responsibilities, "Any pain? Discomfort? Unusual symptoms since your arrival?" "Everything feels heavier. Slower. Like I'm moving through molasses." "Your commander, Data, mentioned I'm operating at reduced capacity." "He's right. It's disconcerting. Will your abilities return to full strength?" Worf asked from his position by the door. The tactical implications were clear in his tone. "Eventually. My cells are already adapting. I can feel it happening." Worf's hand moved fractionally closer to his phaser. "Captain Picard should be informed." "Inform him of what, Mr. Worf?" Beverly asked sharply. "That our guest is recovering from an interdimensional transit." That's exactly what we'd expect. But she understood Worf's concern. When Clark Kent returned to full power, he would be capable of things that their shields, their weapons, their entire tactical doctrine was unprepared to handle. He could potentially destroy the Enterprise with his bare hands. Or save it from threats that would obliterate them otherwise. The question was, which would he choose? "All done," Beverly said, closing her tricorder. "You're in perfect health. Extraordinary health, actually. I don't think you could get sick if you tried." "I don't get sick often," Clark agreed. "Though I've encountered substances and energies that affect me. Kryptonite, magic, red sun radiation. Even in this universe. Galaxy to a planet with a yellow sun. Earth." Data's voice came through Picard's comm badge, unable to contain his curiosity. "Captain, permission to join you? Mr. Kent's testimony may provide crucial scientific data." "Granted, Mr. Data. Bring your findings." Within moments, the android entered, carrying a PADD filled with sensor data. He nodded respectfully to Superman before taking a seat beside Picard. His golden eyes studied their guest with unconcealed fascination. "Please continue," Picard said. "Earth's yellow sun gave me abilities far beyond human norms," Superman continued. "My cellular structure absorbs and stores solar radiation in ways that defy Earth's physics. It grants me strength, invulnerability, flight, and several other capabilities. I was raised by human parents, Jonathan and Martha Kent, in Kansas. They taught me to use these abilities responsibly, to help people, to stand for something greater than myself." "A noble calling," Picard observed. "Though I imagine such power came with significant challenges." "Every day," Superman admitted. "The hardest part isn't the strength or the abilities. It's knowing that no matter how much you do, you can't save everyone. You can't be everywhere. And the choices you make, who to save, when to intervene, they haunt you. Counselor Troy, who had been observing silently from the corner, spoke for the first time. "You carry the weight of worlds, Mr. Kent. I can feel it. And yet you've never set it down, have you?" Superman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No. Because the moment I do, people die. That's not martyrdom or ego, Counselor, it's just mathematics. If I can prevent suffering and choose not to, that suffering becomes my responsibility." "A fascinating ethical framework," Data interjected, his head tilting slightly. "However, I must ask, how do you determine which suffering to prevent? Surely you cannot address all injustice simultaneously." "I do what I can, where I can." "The dimensional transition appears to have disrupted your cellular energy matrix. Additionally, the stellar radiation in this universe, while similar to your yellow sun, operates on slightly different wavelengths. Your cells are adapting, but the process is ongoing." Superman absorbed this information with a slight frown. "That would explain why everything feels slightly off. Like I'm moving through water instead of air. How long until I'm back to full capacity?" "Estimating based on current adaptation rates, 48 to 72 hours. However, Mr. Kent, I must stress, even at your current reduced state, you represent the single most powerful entity I have ever encountered. The implications are profound. I'm not here to threaten anyone, Commander. I just want to understand what happened and hopefully find a way home." Picard stood, moving to the window. The stars rushed past in brilliant streaks, each one representing countless worlds, countless lives. "Mr. Kent, or should I call you Superman?" "Clark is fine, Captain." "Clark, then. You've been honest with us, and I appreciate that. Let me be equally frank. Your arrival presents us with an unprecedented situation. You possess capabilities that could destabilize the balance of power in this quadrant. The Federation has enemies who would seek to exploit you, control you, or eliminate you as a threat. We have allies who would view you with suspicion or fear. And we have principles, the very foundations of our society, that your presence challenges." Clark rose as well, and Picard was struck again by the careful control in every movement. This was a being who had learned to exist among fragile things without breaking them. "I understand, Captain. And I'll submit to whatever security protocols you need. But I won't be imprisoned for existing. And if there's an emergency, if people are in danger, I will help. That's not negotiable." Simultaneously wondering whether we have the luxury of allowing such power to move freely through the quadrant. Picard turned to her. "What do you sense from him?" "Your full assessment." Troy considered carefully. "He's honest, Captain. Almost painfully so. There's no deception in him, no hidden agenda. He genuinely wants to help people, it's core to his identity, like breathing. But there's also loneliness. Profound isolation. He's spent his entire life being different, being other, being the only one of his kind. And underneath it all..." She paused. "Fear. Fear. Of what? Of himself. Of losing control. Of the harm he could cause if he fails to maintain that careful restraint I sense in everything he does. He's terrified of his own power, Captain, even as he uses it to save others." Picard nodded slowly. "Then perhaps he understands the weight of responsibility better than most." "Dismissed, Counselor." Alone in the observation lounge, Picard stared out at the stars. Somewhere in the vastness of space, threats lurked that would see Clark Kent as either a weapon to acquire or an enemy to destroy. The Romulans would want to study him, dissect him, replicate his abilities. The Borg would seek to assimilate his unique biology. And others, pirates, warlords, powers he couldn't yet imagine, would try to exploit or eliminate this new variable in the quadratic equations of interstellar politics. But what troubled Picard most was a simpler question: what happened when an unstoppable force met the immovable object of the Prime Directive? He suspected they would find out soon enough. In sickbay, Dr. Beverly Crusher reviewed Data's preliminary scans with growing astonishment. The readings made no sense, or rather, they made sense only if you accepted that the laws of biology as she understood them were merely suggestions to Kryptonian physiology. Beverly, Data said. Even if helping violates our laws. Even then. Though I hope it doesn't come to that. Picard studied him for a long moment. In his career, he'd encountered beings of immense power, the Dowd, entities that could reshape reality with a thought. But this was different. Clark Kent wasn't a godlike being playing games with lesser species. He was a man, fundamentally, deeply human despite his alien origin, who had been given extraordinary power and chosen to use it for others. Mr. Worf, Picard said without turning, please provide Mr. Kent with guest quarters on Deck 8. He is to have freedom of movement throughout the ship, with the exception of engineering, the bridge, and sensitive tactical areas. This is not a detention, Mr. Kent. Consider yourself our guest while we work to understand your situation. Worf's expression suggested he had strong opinions about this decision, but discipline held. Captain. Dar. Crusher will want to conduct a medical examination, Picard continued. With your permission, of course. We may learn something that helps facilitate your return home. I'm happy to cooperate, Captain. Though I should warn you, I'm not easy to scan. My cellular structure tends to interfere with most medical equipment. Data's eyes gleamed with scientific curiosity. Fascinating. I would very much like to observe this examination, with your consent. Sure, Commander. Maybe you can explain to me how your ship works while we're at it. I've dealt with advanced technology before, but this is beyond anything in my experience. As the meeting broke up, Picard held back, watching as Worf escorted Clark from the observation lounge. Troy remained, sensing the captain's troubled thoughts. You're wondering if we've just taken a tiger aboard, she said softly. I'm wondering, Counselor, whether we have the right to confine someone who has committed no crime. And I respond to immediate threats, natural disasters, violent crimes, invasions. I leave systemic issues to humanity to solve themselves, though I'll admit that line gets blurry sometimes. Picard leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. Mr. Kent, the Federation operates under a principle called the Prime Directive. It forbids us from interfering in the natural development of alien civilizations, particularly those who have not yet achieved faster-than-light travel. We've learned, often through painful experience, that imposing our will, even with the best intentions, can cause catastrophic harm. I'm familiar with the concept, Superman said. Non-interference. I've struggled with similar questions on Earth. But Captain, if you saw a ship in distress, would your Prime Directive prevent you from saving the crew? That depends on numerous factors, Picard replied carefully. The nature of the distress, whether our intervention would contaminate their development, whether they've requested aid. And while you're calculating factors, people die. The words weren't accusatory, merely observational, but they hung in the air like a challenge nonetheless. Worf, who had been standing guard by the door, shifted his weight slightly. His hand hadn't moved toward his phaser, but the tension in his posture increased. Data broke the silence with his characteristic directness. Mr. Kent, I have been analyzing the sensor data from your arrival. Your biology is extraordinary. Your cells function as organic solar collectors, storing energy at an efficiency of 97.3%. Your muscle density suggests you could exert force measured in megatons. Your skeletal structure appears to be a crystalline matrix that would resist most known weapons. However, Superman prompted. You are operating at diminished capacity. Approximately 87% of what I calculate to be your baseline power levels. I imagine there are things that could harm me. Kryptonite? Data inquired. Fragments of my home planet. The radiation is lethal to me. Back home, it was one of the few things that could kill me. Here. He shrugged. I don't know if it even exists. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent comm from the bridge. Picard to senior staff. We've received a distress call from the Drellian colony in the Camus system. They're under attack by Orion pirates. All senior staff to the bridge. Mr. Worf, bring our guest. As they hurried toward the turbolift, Beverly caught the expression on Clark's face. It was the look of someone hearing a cry for help and preparing to answer it, regardless of protocol, regardless of consequences. She had a feeling the Enterprise was about to discover exactly what kind of man they'd brought aboard. And whether that would be their salvation or their greatest challenge. The bridge of the Enterprise hummed with controlled urgency as the senior staff assembled. Picard stood at the center, his bearing radiating the calm authority that had guided his crew through countless crises. On the main view screen, a message played on repeat, grainy, desperate, punctuated by weapons fire. Under attack. 3 Orion vessels, heavily armed. They've disabled our defense grid and are demanding we surrender our dilithium reserves. We have civilians trapped in the processing facility. Please, anyone receiving this, we need help. The message dissolved into static, then looped back to the beginning. Distance to the Camus system, Mr. Data? Picard asked. 18 minutes at current warp speed, Captain. Increase to maximum warp. Tactical analysis, Mr. Worf. The Klingon's fingers moved across his console. 3 Orion interceptors, modified for combat. Disruptor arrays, photon torpedoes. Standard pirate configuration. Designed to overwhelm civilian defenses quickly. The Drellian colony has minimal tactical capabilities. They will not survive 18 minutes. Clark had entered the bridge with Worf, and now stood near the turbolift, taking in the organized chaos of the command center. Picard noticed his presence but didn't acknowledge it yet. There were protocols to follow, decisions to make. Options? Picard addressed his senior staff. Riker stepped forward. We could launch a shuttle ahead at higher impulse, but it wouldn't arrive in time to make a difference. By the time we get there, those pirates will have what they want or they'll have destroyed the colony out of spite. They are Orions, sir, Worf added grimly. They do not leave witnesses. Deanna Troi glanced at Clark, sensing the building tension in him. His posture had shifted almost imperceptibly, weight forward on the balls of his feet, hands loose at his sides. Ready. Captain, Clark said quietly, I can be there in 2 minutes. The bridge fell silent. Every eye turned to him. Explain. How do I get outside without depressurizing the ship? Transporter room 3, Picard said. Mr. O'Brien will beam you into space at a safe distance from the hull. From there. He paused, the absurdity of the situation hitting him. From there, I suppose you simply, fly. That's the idea. Clark moved toward the turbolift, then stopped. Captain, for what it's worth, I understand the position this puts you in. When this is over, if you need to confine me or establish restrictions, I'll cooperate. But right now, people need help. That's all that matters. He was gone before Picard could respond. In Transporter Room 3, O'Brien stood ready at the console, trying to mask his skepticism. Beam someone into the vacuum of space. At warp. The entire concept violated every safety protocol in the book. Ready when you are, Mr. Kent. Clark stepped onto the pad, and O'Brien noticed something interesting. The man's breathing had changed. Slower, deeper, as if he was preparing his body for what was to come. His eyes had closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was a crystalline clarity to them that hadn't been there before. Energize. The transporter beam took him, and suddenly Clark Kent was tumbling through space, the Enterprise streaking away at warp speed. For a moment, he oriented himself, feeling the cosmic radiation washing over him from a nearby star. Different from his sun, yes, but still life-giving. Still power. He could feel his cells drinking it in, adapting, growing stronger. Then he turned toward the Camus system and flew. On the bridge, Data monitored the telemetry with open fascination. "Captain, he has accelerated to 0.47 light speed and is still increasing velocity. His trajectory is precise to within 0.003 degrees. The G-forces he must be experiencing are incalculable. But he's alive?" Riker asked. "Very much so, Commander. In fact, his biosigns are strengthening." Pause. When Clark spoke again, his voice was strained. "Yes. I can hear survivors trapped in collapsed buildings. Children crying. Medical facilities are damaged. Captain, I need to act now." "Negative, Mr. Kent. Wait for." "Captain, a building just collapsed. People are inside." "I'm sorry, but I can't wait." The signal shifted, and they heard wind rushing past at impossible speeds, then impact, the sound of metal tearing like paper. "What's he doing?" Riker demanded. Data's console lit up with sensor telemetry. "He has torn the hatch off one of the Orion ships. He is now inside their vessel." On the Orion interceptor Crimson Fawn, Captain Vosk was counting his spoils when alarms screamed throughout the ship. His tactical officer looked up from his console, mandibles clicking in confusion. "Sir, hull breach on deck 3. But there's no weapons impact, no." The bulkhead door exploded inward. Through the smoke and sparking conduits, a figure emerged. Blue and red suit, cape billowing in the escaping atmosphere, eyes blazing with barely contained fury. "You have 10 seconds to recall your people from the surface and release your prisoners," Clark said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "After that, I start disabling your ships." Vosk reached for his disruptor, but before his hand completed the motion, the weapon was gone, crushed to powder in Clark's grip. 9 seconds. "Kill him!" Vosk screamed. Disruptor fire filled the bridge, brilliant green energy beams converging on the intruder. Clark didn't even flinch. The energy washed over him, dissipating harmlessly against his skin. He walked through the barrage like someone strolling through rain. 8 seconds. The tactical officer abandoned his console and ran. The helmsman followed. Within moments, only Vosk remained, his bravado crumbling as this impossible being approached. What are you?" Picard said. Clark moved closer to the view screen, studying the star chart Data had displayed. "The Camus system is approximately 4.2 light-years from our current position. Even at reduced capacity, I can fly at significant fractions of light speed. I can reach the colony, assess the situation, and intervene before your ship arrives." "Impossible," Worf stated flatly. "No biological entity can survive travel at relativistic velocities without shielding, inertial dampeners, and..." "I'm not from this universe, Commander. The rules are different for me." Clark turned to Picard. "Captain, people are dying right now. I can help them. Let me help them." Data's console beeped urgently. "Captain, I am detecting another transmission from the colony. It is not encouraging." He routed it to the main speakers. Screams. Disruptor fire. A voice pleading in the background, "Please, we have children here." Children. Then silence. Clark's jaw clenched. Picard recognized that expression. He'd seen it in mirrors after the Borg had assimilated him, after he'd been forced to participate in the slaughter at Wolf 359. It was the look of someone measuring the weight of inaction against the consequences of breaking rules. "Mr. Kent," Picard began carefully, "I understand your desire to help. But we don't know the full situation. The Orions may have hostages. Your intervention could escalate." With respect, Captain, the situation is already escalated. Those pirates aren't there to negotiate. They're there to take what they want and eliminate anyone who saw them do it. Every second we debate, more people die. You are not a member of Starfleet, Worf interjected. You have no authority to intervene in Federation space. I'm not asking for authority, Commander. I'm asking for permission to save lives. Picard felt the weight of command settle more heavily on his shoulders. This was the moment that would define their relationship with this extraordinary being. Allow him to go. I believe he is absorbing stellar radiation during flight, which is replenishing his energy reserves at an accelerated rate. Picard settled into his command chair, steepling his fingers. Maintain yellow alert. Mr. Worf, prepare tactical analysis of the colony's defenses and the Orion vessels. When we arrive, I want options. Aye, Captain. 14 minutes later, the modified comm badge crackled to life. Enterprise, this is Clark. I've reached the colony. Situation is bad. 3 Orion ships in orbit, bombardment pattern on the main settlement. I can see fires, structural damage. They've beamed raiding parties to the surface. Estimate 40 to 50 pirates, all armed. Can you confirm civilian casualties? Picard asked. A pause. When Clark spoke again, his voice was strained. Yes. I can hear survivors trapped in collapsed buildings. Children crying. Medical facilities are damaged. Captain, I need to act now. Negative, Mr. Kent. Wait for. Captain, a building just collapsed. People are inside. I'm sorry, but I can't wait. The signal shifted, and they heard wind rushing past at impossible speeds, then impact, the sound of metal tearing like paper. What's he doing? Riker demanded. Data's console lit up with sensor telemetry. He has torn the hatch off one of the Orion ships. He is now inside their vessel. On the Orion interceptor Crimson Fawn, Captain Vosk was counting his spoils when alarms screamed throughout the ship. His tactical officer looked up from his console, mandibles clicking in confusion. Sir, hull breach on deck 3. But there's no weapons impact, no, the bulkhead door exploded inward. Through the smoke and sparking conduits, a figure emerged. Blue and red suit, cape billowing in the escaping atmosphere, eyes blazing with barely contained fury. You have 10 seconds to recall your people from the surface and release your prisoners, Clark said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Vosk's hand trembled as he reached for the communication panel. But pride, or perhaps stupidity, made him hesitate. Instead, he triggered the ship's self-destruct sequence. If I can't have the spoils, neither can you, freak. 30 seconds until this ship vaporizes, taking half the colony with it when we crash. Clark's eyes narrowed. His X-ray vision swept through the ship's interior, identifying the antimatter containment pods, the destruct mechanism, the hostages trapped in the cargo bay 3 decks below. 30 seconds to save everyone and prevent a catastrophe. For most beings, it would be impossible. For him, it was Tuesday. He moved in a blur, faster than Vosk's eyes could track. First to the cargo bay, tearing through deck plating like tissue paper. 6 Drellian civilians, bound and terrified. He gathered them carefully, so carefully, treating them like spun glass, and leaped through the hull breach back into space. A controlled fall toward the planet, depositing them safely in a clear area near the colony's emergency shelter. 20 seconds. Back to the Crimson Fawn. Down to engineering. The antimatter containment was destabilizing, the magnetic bottles beginning to fail. He couldn't stop the sequence, the Orion encryption was too complex, too alien. But he could remove the problem entirely. 15 seconds. Clark grabbed the entire antimatter assembly, a device the size of a small shuttle, and ripped it free from its moorings. Conduit sparked and died. Alarms screamed. He punched through the hull again, this time carrying a bomb that would destroy everything within a kilometer radius. 10 seconds. He flew straight up, away from the planet, away from the colony, accelerating to speeds that turned the stars into streaks of light. The antimatter containment shuddered in his grip, the magnetic fields collapsing, the matter and antimatter beginning their inevitable dance toward annihilation. 5 seconds. He threw it. And he set a precedent that Clark Kent could act independently of Federation law. Forbid him, and he risked losing whatever trust they'd begun to build. Worse, he condemned innocent people to death when he had the power to prevent it. Counselor Troy spoke softly. Captain, he's going to go whether we give permission or not. I can feel it. The question is whether he goes as our ally or as someone who's already learned he can't trust us. Picard met Clark's eyes. And if the situation is more complex than it appears? If there are political ramifications, treaty violations, consequences we cannot foresee? Then I'll deal with them. But I won't stand here and listen to people die when I can prevent it, Captain. That's not who I am. The statement hung in the air, not a threat, but a simple truth. Picard had encountered many powerful beings in his career. Most wielded their power with arrogance or capriciousness. But Clark Kent wielded his with the burden of someone who understood exactly what was at stake. Very well, Picard said finally. But you will establish communication with the Enterprise the moment you arrive. You will assess the situation and wait for tactical analysis before engaging. And Mr. Kent, minimal force. These pirates are criminals, not enemies in war. Do you understand? I do, Captain. Thank you. Mr. Data, can you modify a comm badge to maintain a signal at the velocities Mr. Kent will be traveling? Data's fingers flew across his console. Already working on it, sir. I am routing the signal through subspace relays and implementing a quantum entanglement protocol. It should maintain coherent communication for approximately 97% of the journey. He stood, producing a modified comm badge and handing it to Clark. This will also allow us to track your position and monitor your vital signs, though I suspect our sensors will have difficulty with the latter. Clark attached the badge to his suit. The containment pod sailed into space, tumbling end over end. Clark reversed direction, putting distance between himself and the device, even as he calculated trajectories, blast radii, potential fallout. 0. The explosion was beautiful and terrible, a miniature star blooming in the darkness, energy enough to power a city for a year released in an instant. The shockwave caught Clark, sent him tumbling through space, but his invulnerability held. The radiation washed over him, through him, and his cells absorbed it greedily. When the light faded, he was alone in space, floating amid dissipating energy, breathing vacuum as easily as air. Enterprise, this is Clark. Immediate threat neutralized. Beginning search and rescue operations on the surface. On the bridge, the crew sat in stunned silence. They'd watched it all on long-range sensors. The impossible speed, the casual destruction of military-grade equipment, the precision rescue under impossible time pressure. My God, Riker whispered. He just saved an entire colony single-handedly. And violated approximately 17 Federation regulations in the process, Worf noted, though his tone carried a hint of grudging respect. Picard said nothing. He simply watched the sensor display as Clark Kent returned to the Drellian colony and began pulling survivors from wreckage with hands that could crush starships but held broken people with infinite gentleness. They'd asked what would happen when unstoppable power met immovable principle. Now they knew. The question was, what would they do about it? The Enterprise dropped out of warp at the edge of the Camus system 4 minutes later. On the view screen, the Drellian colony sprawled across the primary moon's surface, a collection of domed habitats and industrial facilities now marked by scorch marks and structural damage. 2 Orion interceptors hung in orbit, their weapons systems powered down, their crews presumably debating whether to fight or flee. They chose flee. "Captain, the remaining Orion vessels are breaking orbit," Worf reported. "They are setting course out of the system at maximum impulse." "Let them go," Picard ordered. "Hail the colony. Let them know we're here to provide assistance." "Aye, sir." Data's console chirped with incoming telemetry. "Captain, I am tracking Mr. Kent's position. He is on the colony's surface, moving between damaged structures at high speed. Sensor readings indicate he is extracting survivors from collapsed buildings and transporting them to the medical facility." On the view screen, the visual magnification showed exactly that. Clark moved through the devastation like a force of nature, lifting debris that would require industrial equipment, cutting through reinforced walls with beams of concentrated heat from his eyes, flying between crisis points faster than ground vehicles could manage. And everywhere he went, injured colonists emerged, carried with impossible gentleness to safety. "He's done more in the last 5 minutes than our entire rescue team could accomplish in an hour," Riker observed. "Perhaps," Picard said quietly. "But at what cost?" The question hung in the air as the Enterprise settled into orbit. Dr. Crusher assembled her medical teams. Geordi LaForge prepared engineering crews to assist with structural repairs. The ship's resources mobilized with the practiced efficiency that defined Starfleet's disaster response protocols. But they all knew the truth. Clark Kent had already done the heavy lifting. 2 hours later, the last of the survivors had been. Then perhaps it's time to learn a new skill. Picard gestured to the frozen city. "Computer, end program." Metropolis dissolved, replaced by the holodeck's familiar grid. The 3 of them stood in the empty space, and somehow it felt less lonely than the simulated city had. "Come," Picard said. "Join me for tea in my ready room. We should discuss what happens next, both regarding your situation and your status aboard this ship. Am I being confined after all?" "On the contrary. I'm offering you a position." That got Clark's attention. "What kind of position?" "We'll discuss the details over Earl Grey. But suffice to say, Mr. Kent, if you're going to be stranded in this universe for the foreseeable future, you might as well make yourself useful. Starfleet could benefit from someone with your unique capabilities. Provided you can learn to work within our framework. The prime directive framework that I already violated today." Picard's expression turned wry. "Let's call that a learning experience for both of us. Come." As they walked toward the turbolift, Data's voice came through the ship's comm system. "Captain, we are receiving a Priority 1 transmission from Starfleet Command. Admiral Nechayev wishes to speak with you immediately. It concerns Mr. Kent." Picard and Clark exchanged glances. "It appears," Picard said dryly, "that word of your exploits has reached headquarters. This should be interesting." In his ready room, Picard sat behind his desk while Clark stood to the side, just out of frame. Admiral Nechayev's stern face filled the view screen, her expression suggesting she'd just bitten into something particularly sour. "Captain Picard, I've received some very disturbing reports about an unauthorized individual conducting military operations in Federation space. An individual with capabilities that my science advisors tell me are physically impossible. Would you care to explain?" Accounted for. The Drellian colony administrator, a stern-faced woman named Kelsa Thrin, stood in the Enterprise's observation lounge, her clothes still covered in dust and blood. She'd refused medical treatment until every one of her people had been seen to first. "Captain Picard," she said, her voice hoarse from smoke inhalation and shouting orders. "I don't know how to thank you. If Mr. Kent hadn't arrived when he did." She couldn't finish the sentence. "How many casualties?" Picard asked gently. 43 dead. Another 100 wounded, though your Dr. Crusher assures me they'll all recover. It could have been so much worse. It should have been worse. Those pirates had us dead to rights. They were going to kill us all. Clark stood by the window, his back to the room. He'd been silent since beaming aboard, his cape scorched at the edges, his suit marked with soot and blood that wasn't his own. Picard noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched rhythmically. 43, Clark said quietly. I was too late for 43 people. You saved over 2,000, Mr. Kent, Kelsa said firmly. You're a hero. Clark turned, and Picard saw something raw in his expression, grief mixed with anger, directed entirely inward. Heroes don't let 43 people die, Administrator. Heroes arrive in time to save everyone. That's an impossible standard, Counselor Troi said from her position near the door. Then maybe I'm holding myself to the wrong standard. Or maybe I need to be faster. Stronger. He looked at Picard. Captain, I'd like to return to the surface and help with the recovery operations. There's still debris to clear, infrastructure to repair. Mr. Kent, Picard interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. You've done enough for today. My crew will handle the reconstruction. You need rest. I don't need rest. I need, Clark stopped himself, jaw clenching. You're right. I'm sorry. I'll return to my quarters. Or a version of it, anyway. I asked the computer to extrapolate from Earth's historical records. It's close enough. Picard approached carefully, stopping a respectful distance away. You disabled the safety protocols. I needed to feel the height. The real danger, or as close to real as this simulation can provide. Without risk, it's just play acting. And what were you planning to do up here? Remember. Clark finally turned, and Picard saw the weight in his eyes. Remember why I do this. Remember the people I've saved. Remember the ones I couldn't. He gestured to the frozen city. There are 8 million people in Metropolis. On a good day, I might save a few hundred. On a bad day, I'm fighting alien invasions or stopping disasters that threaten the entire planet. But there are still 8 million individual people, each with their own problems, their own emergencies, their own needs. And you cannot save them all, Picard said. No. I can't. But I try anyway, because what's the alternative? Accept that suffering is inevitable and stop caring? I can't do that, Captain. It would kill something essential in me. Troi stepped forward. Clark, may I ask you something? When did you last allow yourself to simply be Clark Kent, not Superman? When did you last do something just for yourself, not because someone needed saving? The question seemed to genuinely confuse him. I don't know. There's always someone who needs help. Always another crisis. And that, Picard said firmly, is precisely why you will eventually fail. Not because you lack power or speed or strength, but because you're running yourself into the ground. Even the finest machinery requires maintenance, Mr. Kent. How much more so a living being? With respect, Captain, I'm not like other living beings. I don't tire the way humans do. I don't need as much sleep or rest or, that's not what I'm talking about, and you know it. Picard moved to stand. He left without another word, his cape billowing behind him. The door slid shut, and Kelsa shook her head in wonder. Is he always like that? So, driven? We're still learning who he is, Picard admitted. But yes, I suspect this is fundamental to his nature. After Kelsa had returned to the surface to coordinate with Starfleet's relief teams, Picard found himself alone with Troi once again. He blames himself for the deaths, the counselor said. Even though arriving any later would have meant total annihilation. Even though he did something that should be physically impossible. He's measuring himself against perfection and finding himself wanting. A dangerous habit for someone with his capabilities, Picard observed. More than dangerous, Captain. It's unsustainable. He carries so much guilt, so much responsibility. I can feel it radiating from him like heat. And the worst part? She turned to face him. He thinks it's normal. He thinks this is what heroism requires, eternal vigilance, zero margin for error, complete sacrifice of self. Then perhaps it's time someone showed him a different model, Picard said. Computer, locate Clark Kent. Clark Kent is in holodeck 2. Picard's eyebrow rose. What's he running? Unable to determine. The holodeck program is being generated in real time based on user specifications. Current safety protocols are disabled. Picard and Troy exchanged glances, then headed for the holodeck at a brisk pace. When the doors opened, they found themselves standing on a rooftop, a recreation of an Earth city, gleaming towers stretching toward a simulated sky. Clark stood at the edge, looking down at the streets far below where holographic people went about their simulated lives. Computer, pause program, Picard commanded. The city froze mid-motion. Clark didn't turn around. I needed to see something familiar, he said quietly. This is Metropolis. My city. Beside him at the rooftop's edge, looking down at the frozen city. I've commanded starships for over 2 decades. I've lost crew members. Made decisions that cost lives. Failed to arrive in time, failed to see threats before they materialized, failed in more ways than I can count. And do you know what I learned? Clark waited. That perfection is the enemy of good. That sometimes the best decision is still a terrible one. That we are all fallible, and accepting that fallibility is what allows us to continue functioning when perfection proves impossible. Picard turned to face him directly. You saved 2,000 lives today, Mr. Kent. 43 people died, yes, and that is tragic. But 43 is not 2,000. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're saying I should accept the losses. I'm saying you should acknowledge them, learn from them, and carry forward. Not let them paralyze you or drive you to impossible standards that will only ensure greater failure. Clark was silent for a long moment. The holographic metropolis waited, frozen in time, for someone to release it back into motion. On my Earth, Clark said finally, I had friends. Other heroes. People who understood what it meant to carry this kind of responsibility. We supported each other, reminded each other that we were human, well, mostly human in my case. Here, I'm alone. The only one who can do what I do. It's isolating. You're not alone, Troy said softly. You have the Enterprise crew. You have Captain Picard. You have me, if you need someone to talk to. We may not share your abilities, but we understand burden. We understand loss. And we understand, Picard added, the importance of knowing when to ask for help. Something I suspect you're not particularly good at. Despite everything, Clark smiled slightly. No, I'm not. Superman is supposed to be the one who helps, not the one who needs it. He left without another word, his cape billowing behind him. The door slid shut, and Kelsa shook her head in wonder. Is he always like that? So, driven? We're still learning who he is, Picard admitted. But yes, I suspect this is fundamental to his nature. After Kelsa had returned to the surface to coordinate with Starfleet's relief teams, Picard found himself alone with Troy once again. He blames himself for the deaths, the counselor said. Even though arriving any later would have meant total annihilation. Even though he did something that should be physically impossible. He's measuring himself against perfection and finding himself wanting. A dangerous habit for someone with his capabilities, Picard observed. More than dangerous, Captain. It's unsustainable. He carries so much guilt, so much responsibility. I can feel it radiating from him like heat. And the worst part? She turned to face him. He thinks it's normal. He thinks this is what heroism requires: eternal vigilance, zero margin for error, complete sacrifice of self. Then perhaps it's time someone showed him a different model, Picard said. Computer, locate Clark Kent. Clark Kent is in holodeck 2. Picard's eyebrow rose. What's he running? Unable to determine. The holodeck program is being generated in real time based on user specifications. Current safety protocols are disabled. Picard and Troy exchanged glances, then headed for the holodeck at a brisk pace. When the doors opened, they found themselves standing on a rooftop, a recreation of an Earth city, gleaming towers stretching toward a simulated sky. Clark stood at the edge, looking down at the streets far below where holographic people went about their simulated lives. Computer, pause program, Picard commanded. The city froze mid-motion. Clark didn't turn around. I needed to see something familiar, he said quietly. This is Metropolis. My city. In Federation space. After that, this goes up the chain of command, and I won't be able to protect either of you. Understood? Understood, Admiral. Thank you. The transmission ended. Picard sat back in his chair, suddenly feeling the weight of the decision he'd just made. He'd defied a direct order from an admiral, put his career in jeopardy, all for a being he'd known for less than a day. Captain, Clark said quietly, you didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Because if Starfleet has become an organization that imprisons beings for having the wrong capabilities, then it's not an organization I wish to serve. Picard stood, moving to the window. But the Admiral was correct about one thing: your presence changes everything. We need to find a way for you to exist in this universe without triggering an arms race or a political crisis. Any suggestions? Picard turned, a slight smile on his lips. As it happens, yes. But first, you need to understand something about the universe you found yourself in. The Federation, the Prime Directive, the delicate balance of power that keeps the Quadrant from descending into total war. He gestured to the chairs. Sit. We have much to discuss, and only 48 hours to determine your future. Clark sat, and as Picard began to explain the intricacies of 24th century interstellar politics, he realized something. This wasn't just about protecting Clark Kent from Starfleet bureaucracy. It was about figuring out what role a god among mortals could play in a universe built on the principle that no one should be above the law. Not even Superman. The next morning, Captain Picard convened a senior staff meeting in the observation lounge. Clark sat at the far end of the conference table, acutely aware that he was the subject under discussion. The assembled officers, Riker, Data, Worf, Troy, Crusher, and LaForge, studied him with varying degrees of curiosity, wariness, and scientific fascination. Let's be frank, Picard began, his hands folded on the table. We have 48 hours to demonstrate that Mr. Kent can operate within Federation parameters without becoming a destabilizing force. Admiral Nechayev has made it clear that Starfleet Command views him as either an asset to be controlled or a threat to be contained. I refuse to accept either categorization. What's the alternative, Captain? Riker asked. We can't just pretend he doesn't exist. Every intelligence agency in the Quadrant will have heard about the Camus system incident by now. Data tilted his head slightly. Commander Riker raises a valid concern. The Orion Syndicate will disseminate information about Mr. Kent's capabilities as a warning to other criminal enterprises. The Romulans monitor all Orion communications. The Klingon Empire maintains extensive intelligence networks. Within 72 hours, every major power will know about him. Let them know, Clark said quietly. All eyes turned to him. I'm not going to hide what I am. Back home, I operated publicly. People knew Superman existed. They knew I would help if I could. That transparency built trust. Worf's response was immediate. This is not Earth, Mr. Kent. In this quadrant, displays of power invite challenges. The Klingon Empire respects strength, yes, but they also test it. If you become known, houses will send warriors to fight you, to prove themselves against an opponent of legendary capability. Then I'll have to disappoint them, Clark replied. I don't fight for sport or honor. Only when lives are at stake. And the Romulans? Worf pressed. They will not challenge you directly. They will study you, search for weaknesses, and when they find them, they will exploit them without mercy or honor. The Tal Shiar does not accept beings they cannot control or predict. Beverly leaned forward, her medical instincts engaged. Clark, you said back in your universe there were substances that could harm you. Kryptonite. If the Romulans discover that, or something similar that exists here, they'll weaponize it. I know. Clark met her gaze steadily. I've lived with that risk my entire adult life. It doesn't change what I have to do. Geordi adjusted his visor, which had been providing him with fascinating, and somewhat overwhelming, data about Clark's energy signature. Captain, I've been analyzing the sensor logs from the Camus system. The energy output Clark generated when he threw that antimatter containment was, well, it was equivalent to a photon torpedo barrage. And he did it with his bare hands. If the Borg get wind of this, the Borg will attempt assimilation, data finished. They seek to add biological and technological distinctiveness to their own. Mr. Kent represents both in unprecedented forms. A Borg cube would certainly be dispatched to acquire him. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Everyone at the table had faced the Borg. Everyone had lost people to them. The idea of the collective gaining Superman's abilities was the stuff of nightmares. Could they assimilate you? Troy asked carefully. Could Borg nanoprobes integrate with your cellular structure? Clark was quiet for a moment. I don't know. My biology is different. Foreign to this universe. But I'd rather not find out through experimentation. Agreed, Picard said firmly. Which brings us to the central question, how do we position Mr. Kent so that he can operate effectively without painting a target on his back for every hostile force in the quadrant? Make him part of Starfleet, Riker suggested. Give him official standing. Where your rules would require me to stand aside and watch people die, I'm telling you now, I won't. I'll do what needs to be done and face whatever consequences come. I wouldn't expect anything less, Picard replied. And I suspect there will be times when I'm grateful for your willingness to bear that burden. He extended his hand. Welcome to the Enterprise, Mr. Kent. Consultant status, effective immediately. Clark shook his hand, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, he felt something that approximated hope. Maybe he could find a way to be Superman here. Maybe these people, with their complex ethics and careful deliberations, could help him navigate a cosmos far more politically intricate than anything he'd encountered back home. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent hail from the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Data's comm badge chirped, and he tapped it. Data here. Commander, we're receiving a distress signal, the voice of Lieutenant Daniels reported from the bridge. It's from a Romulan science vessel. They claim to be under attack, by other Romulans. Everyone in the observation lounge exchanged glances. Romulan-on-Romulan violence was unusual enough to be noteworthy. For them to send a distress call to a Federation starship was unprecedented. On our way, Picard said, already moving toward the door. To Clark. You wanted to see how we handle these situations. Now's your chance to observe. As they filed out of the observation lounge and headed for the bridge, Worf fell into step beside Clark. A word of advice, Mr. Kent, the Klingon said quietly. The Romulans are not Orion pirates. They are subtle, intelligent, and utterly without honor. They will view you as either a tool to use or a threat to eliminate. Do not assume good faith in any interaction with them. Noted, Clark replied. Though in my experience, most species have some capacity for honor. Even the ones who claim not to. Sons he'd never felt. On my Earth, there's a phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. I've always interpreted that to mean I have a responsibility to use my power to help. You're saying the responsible thing is sometimes not to use it. Context matters, Data offered. In the Camus system, the Orions were external aggressors attacking a Federation colony. Your intervention was defensive and proportional. But if you were to intervene in, for example, a civil war on a pre-warp civilization, even to prevent genocide, you would fundamentally alter that society's development. They would structure their future around the memory of your intervention. You become a foundational myth, and their natural progression is forever changed. I've dealt with that before, Clark said. Back home, there were times I had to make similar choices. Usually I tried to work within existing power structures, support local heroes, enable solutions rather than imposing them. He turned back to face the group. But I won't promise to stand aside and watch atrocities unfold just because the victims haven't invented warp drive yet. That's a line I won't cross. Picard stood as well, joining Clark at the window. Then we need to find a compromise. A framework that allows you to act when truly necessary while minimizing the disruption to the larger political and social order. What did you have in mind? Starfleet operates under strict rules of engagement. We respond to distress calls from Federation members and allies. We investigate threats to Federation security. We provide humanitarian aid when requested by appropriate authorities. But we don't impose ourselves on sovereign powers or developing civilizations except under extreme circumstances. And those extreme circumstances are genuinely defined in Starfleet General Order 1, data supplied. However, interpretations vary. Captain Picard has, on occasion, bent the directive when. The commander's face went through a fascinating series of expressions in rapid succession: surprise, calculation, barely concealed fear, and finally, forced composure. So, the Romulan said slowly, the rumors are true. The being from another reality exists. I exist, Clark confirmed. And I'm asking you, commander to commander, to stand down. Whatever these people did, there's a better way to resolve this than blowing them out of space. You have no authority here, alien. This is Romulan space, and you are someone who's having a really bad week and is running out of patience, Clark interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of steel. I've watched people die. I've tried to play by the rules of a universe I barely understand. And right now, I'm watching you murder civilians while hiding behind political authority. So here's what's going to happen: you're going to power down your weapons and let that science vessel reach Federation space. Or I'm going to come over there and power them down for you. The Romulan bridge went silent. The commander's face flushed with a mixture of rage and calculation. You threaten a vessel of the Romulan Star Empire? I'm making a promise, Commander. Those people on that science vessel? They're under my protection now. Test me if you want. But I should warn you, I've already destroyed one ship this week. I'd prefer not to make it two. Picard watched this exchange with carefully concealed alarm. This was not how diplomatic negotiations were supposed to proceed. But he also noticed something interesting: the Romulan commander was backing down. His weapons were still hot, but he hadn't fired. The threat assessment was happening in real time, and Clark had just shifted the entire tactical equation. This is not over, the commander said finally. The Tal Shiar will hear of this. And they will be very interested in you, Superman. Confronted with scenarios involving forced cultural contamination, genocide, or extinction-level events. Worf added grimly, the captain has also faced court-martial proceedings for those decisions. The Prime Directive is not flexible, Mr. Kent. It is absolute, except when it isn't. Which creates significant problems for those who choose to violate it, even for good cause. So you want me to take the same risks you do, Clark said to Picard. Make judgment calls and live with the consequences. Yes. With one crucial difference, you're not bound by Starfleet regulations or Federation law. As a dimensional refugee, you exist in a legal gray area. That gives you latitude that I don't have, but it also means you lack institutional support when those judgment calls go wrong. Riker interjected, which is why the consultant position makes sense. It provides you with some legal standing without the full burden of Starfleet regulations. You work with us when our interests align, but you're free to act independently when they don't. And when I act independently in ways Starfleet disapproves of, then you deal with the consequences, Picard said bluntly. As we all do. But at least you'll have allies who understand the complexity of these decisions. People who've wrestled with the same moral dilemmas. Clark considered this, his superhearing picking up the ambient sounds of the ship. The hum of the warp core, the whisper of recycled air, the distant conversations of crew members going about their duties. 700 people on this vessel, each trusting Picard to make the right calls, to balance competing priorities, to keep them safe while honoring their principles. It was a burden Clark understood intimately. All right, he said finally. I'll try it your way. Work within your framework. Respect the Prime Directive when I can. But Captain, if we encounter a situation. Looking forward to it, Clark replied. The transmission cut. For a moment, the warbird held position, its weapons still locked on the science vessel. Then, with what could only be described as reluctant deliberation, it powered down its disruptors and withdrew to a holding distance. Hail the science vessel, Picard ordered. A Romulan woman appeared on screen, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Behind her, Clark could see other Romulans. Scientists by their dress, civilians by their bearing. Thank you, Captain Picard, she said. I am Sub-Commander Varel. We request asylum in Federation space. We have information that Starfleet Command will find extremely valuable. What kind of information? Riker asked. Varel glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to ensure she wasn't overheard, then looked back at the screen. Information about a covert Tal Shiar operation. One that violates the Treaty of Algeron and threatens the stability of the entire neutral zone. But I will only discuss this with someone I can trust not to betray us to the Empire. Her eyes found Clark. I will speak only with him. The one they're calling Superman. If the rumors are true, if he cannot be corrupted or controlled by the Tal Shiar, then he is the only one I can trust with this information. Picard and Clark exchanged glances. It appears, Picard said dryly, that your reputation precedes you, Mr. Kent. And that our simple consultant arrangement just became considerably more complicated. Clark looked at the desperate Romulans on the screen, at the warbird waiting in the darkness like a predator, at the crew of the Enterprise watching to see what he would do. He'd wanted to help people. He'd wanted to make a difference. He was about to get his wish, and discover whether the rules of this universe would let him survive the consequences. The Romulan science vessel, designation RRV Theoretical, limped into Federation space under the Enterprise's escort. The Deridex warbird maintained its distance, shadowing them just beyond the neutral zone boundary, a silent promise that this matter was far from over. Clark watched it through the observation lounge window, his enhanced vision picking out details that the Enterprise's sensors struggled to resolve. They're running full scans on us, he said. I can see their sensor arrays tracking our movements. They're particularly interested in me. Worf stood at tactical, his expression grim. The Tal Shiar will be analyzing every piece of data they can gather. By now, they know your approximate power level, your speed, your energy output. They will be searching for weaknesses. Let them search, Clark replied, though he felt a knot of unease in his chest. Back home, Lex Luthor had spent years doing the same thing. Studying him, testing him, looking for the chink in Superman's armor. Eventually, Lex had found kryptonite. The question was, what would the Romulans find? Picard entered the observation lounge, followed by Data and Troy. The Romulans are docking in Shuttle Bay 2. Sub-Commander Varel insists on speaking with you immediately, Mr. Kent. Alone. That's not acceptable, Worf interjected. This could be a Tal sheer deception. An assassination attempt or... An assassination attempt with what? Clark asked gently. Commander, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not easy to kill. And if these people have information that could prevent a larger conflict, we need to hear it. Picard considered. Counselor, what do you sense from Sub-Commander Varel? Troy closed her eyes, concentrating. Genuine fear. Desperation. She believes what she's doing is right, but she's terrified of the consequences. There's no deception that I can detect, but Romulans are naturally guarded. I can't read her as clearly as I would most species. Then we proceed cautiously, Picard. Thank you, Doctor. She hesitated, then said quietly, my son Wesley looks up to you. He's been talking non-stop about the hero from another universe who saves people because it's the right thing to do. Please, come back. Kids need heroes who show them that doing the right thing doesn't always mean dying for it. The reminder hit harder than Clark expected. He'd been so focused on the mission, on the tactical details and strategic implications, that he'd forgotten the human element. The way his actions rippled outward, affecting people he'd never met. I'll come back, he promised. Troy was the last to speak with him, pulling him aside while the others made final preparations. I can feel your fear, she said softly. You hide it well, but it's there. You're afraid you won't be fast enough, strong enough. That you'll fail these people the way you feel you failed the 43 who died at the Drellian colony. Clark didn't deny it. That fear keeps me sharp. Reminds me what's at stake. It also drives you to take risks that might get you killed. Clark, promise me something, if the situation becomes impossible, if you can't win, retreat. Live to fight another day. The Quadrant needs you for more than just this mission. I'll do what I have to do, Counselor. Same as always. She sighed, recognizing the futility of arguing. Then go with my blessing. And know that we're all rooting for you. Clark nodded, then turned to Picard. Captain, if this goes wrong, if I trigger a war, tell Starfleet the truth. That I acted alone, against your orders. Don't let this crew take the fall for my choices. Mr. Kent, if this goes wrong, I suspect Starfleet will be too busy dealing with the Romulans to court-martial anyone. But I appreciate the sentiment. Picard extended his hand. Good luck. And remember, you're not just fighting for those 50,000 colonists. You're fighting for the principle that beings of power can still choose justice over expedience. Mr. Kent. I've been told that before, Clark replied with a slight smile. Usually by people who were right. We have 72 hours, Picard said, his tone shifting to command mode. Let's use them wisely. Data, begin your analysis. Geordi, you have full access to Sub-Commander Varel's technical data. Worf, coordinate with Starfleet intelligence, discreetly. See if we can get this information to sympathetic elements within the Romulan power structure without revealing our source. Counselor, continue working with Varel and her team. See if there's anything else they know that might help. As the staff dispersed to their assignments, Picard held Clark back. Mr. Kent, a word. When they were alone, Picard's expression softened slightly. You realize you're forcing my hand. Making me choose between regulations and conscience. I know. And I'm sorry. But Captain, if our positions were reversed, if you had the power to stop this, would you hesitate? Picard was quiet for a long moment. No, he admitted finally. I'd find a way to justify it, dress it up in tactical language and strategic necessity, but ultimately, no. I wouldn't hesitate. He met Clark's eyes. Which is why I understand the danger you represent. Not to the Federation, but to yourself. The burden of being able to solve problems that others cannot, it's corrosive, Mr. Kent. It eats at you, makes you feel responsible for every tragedy you don't prevent. I see it in your eyes already. I've carried that burden for years, Captain. It doesn't get lighter, but you learn to bear it. Or it crushes you, Picard said softly. I've seen it happen to officers who took too much responsibility on their shoulders. They burn out, make mistakes, sometimes destroy themselves trying to save everyone. He placed a hand on Clark's shoulder. You're not alone anymore, Mr. Kent. You have this crew, this ship. Decided. Mr. Kent, you'll meet with Sub-Commander Varel in Conference Room 4. Counselor Troy will be present to monitor the emotional context. Commander Data will observe via internal sensors. If anything seems amiss, we'll intervene immediately. Understood, Captain. 20 minutes later, Clark sat across from Sub-Commander Varel in the quiet confines of Conference Room 4. The Romulan woman was younger than she'd appeared on the view screen, perhaps mid-30s in human equivalence. With the distinctive pointed ears and upswept eyebrows of her species. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a Romulan data isolinear chip. Troy sat in the corner, an unobtrusive presence, while Clark waited patiently for Varel to begin. They say you cannot be corrupted, Varel said finally, her accented voice barely above a whisper. That you serve no empire, no government. That you help people because you choose to, not because you're ordered to. Is this true? It's true, Clark confirmed. I'm not part of Starfleet's command structure. I make my own choices. And if I tell you something that could start a war between the Federation and the Romulan Star Empire? Would you still choose to help? Clark leaned forward slightly. Sub-Commander, I've faced that kind of decision before. Sometimes preventing war means exposing the truth, even when it's dangerous. Sometimes it means finding alternatives to conflict that powerful people don't want to acknowledge. What I won't do is ignore information that could save lives just because it's politically inconvenient. Varel studied him with those sharp Romulan eyes, and Clark had the sense he was being evaluated in ways he didn't fully understand. Finally, she placed the data chip on the table. The Tal Shiar has been conducting illegal weapons research, she said. In violation of the Treaty of Algeron, they have been developing phasing cloak technology combined with the Laren radiation weapons. Do you understand what this means? In the captain's ready room, Picard listened to the full report with his characteristic composure, though Clark noticed the tightness around his eyes as the implications became clear. This is a crisis, Picard said finally. But Mr. Kent, you must understand, if you act against a Romulan military facility, even to prevent an atrocity, you will be committing an act of war. The Romulan Star Empire will view it as an unprovoked attack. They may retaliate against the Federation, and we will be forced to respond. Millions could die in the conflict that follows. And if I don't act? Clark challenged. 50,000 die in the field test. Then how many more when the Tal Shiar deploys this weapon for real? How many worlds could they hold hostage? I don't know, Picard admitted. But that doesn't change the reality of our situation. The Prime Directive aside, we have treaties, alliances, diplomatic frameworks designed to prevent exactly this kind of escalation. If we bypass those frameworks every time we face a crisis, they become meaningless. Data, who had been reviewing the technical specifications on Varel's data chip, looked up from his console. Captain, the information here is extraordinarily detailed. If we present this evidence to the Federation Council, they could file formal charges through diplomatic channels. The Romulan Senate would be forced to investigate the Tal Shiar's activities. And while they investigate, the field test happens, Clark said. 50,000 people die, and the Romulans cover it up or claim it was a sensor malfunction or natural disaster. We all know how this plays out. Picard stood, moving to his window. Earth was visible in the distance. They'd reached the Sol system as ordered by Admiral Nechayev. There may be another option. Starfleet intelligence has contacts within the Romulan power structure. Senators who oppose the Tal Shir's autonomy. Military leaders who see them as a threat to proper imperial authority. If we can get this information to the right people. In 72 hours. Clark interrupted. Captain, I respect your faith in diplomatic solutions, but we're out of time. Those people on that colony world don't have the luxury of waiting for political maneuvers. And the Federation doesn't have the luxury of starting a war. Picard's voice rose slightly, his frustration finally showing. Mr. Kent, I understand your desire to act. God knows I've felt it myself more times than I can count. But you're asking me to approve an operation that could destabilize the entire quadrant. I'm not asking for approval, Clark said quietly. I'm telling you what I'm going to do and hoping we can find a way to do it that minimizes the fallout. The silence that followed was profound. Picard turned from the window, his expression torn between admiration and exasperation. You're going regardless of what I say. I have to. I'm sorry, Captain, but I can't stand aside and let 50,000 people die when I have the power to prevent it. That's not who I am. Picard sighed deeply, the weight of command settling more heavily on his shoulders. Then at least let us help you do it intelligently. Data, analyze the facility specifications. Find weaknesses, vulnerabilities, anything Mr. Kent can exploit. Geordi, I want you to examine the Thalaran weapon designs. Determine if there's a way to neutralize or disable them without triggering detonation. Captain, Worf objected, if we assist in this operation, we become complicit. Starfleet will court-martial you. They may court-martial the entire senior staff. Perhaps, Picard agreed. But I'd rather face a court-martial than live with the knowledge that I could have prevented mass murder and chose protocol over principle. He looked at Clark. You're a bad influence. Everything. Technical specifications, facility locations, personnel files, projected deployment timelines. Enough evidence to prove the Tal Shir's violations beyond any doubt. She hesitated. But there's a complication. The prototype is nearly complete. They're planning a field test in 72 hours. A field test? Troy asked, her voice strained. On what target? A colony world in disputed space. Not Federation, not Romulan. Neutral territory with a population of about 50,000. The Tal Shir has deemed them expendable test subjects. Varel's voice cracked. If that test succeeds, the Tal Shir will have proof of concept for a weapon that could shift the entire balance of power. They could threaten to destroy the Federation capital worlds, exterminate entire species, without ever being detected or stopped. Clark stood abruptly, the data chip still in his hand. We have to stop them. How? Varel asked. The facility is deep inside Romulan space. It's protected by sensor nets, defense satellites, and garrison ships. Even your Enterprise couldn't reach it without triggering an interstellar incident. And you? She looked at him carefully. You're powerful, yes. But can you survive the Thalaran radiation? Can you phase through the quantum barriers they've erected? Can you even find the facility before they move the prototype? I'll find a way. Mr. Kent, Troy interjected gently, this is exactly the kind of situation Captain Picard was warning you about. Unilateral action against a target in Romulan space could start a war. We need to think this through. But Clark was already thinking it through, his mind racing through scenarios and possibilities. 50,000 people. 72 hours. A weapon designed for mass slaughter, and the only thing standing in the way was a set of political protocols designed for a universe where godlike beings didn't exist. I need to speak with Captain Picard, he said. Once you cross into Romulan space, you'll be beyond our help. If something goes wrong, if the Tal-Shir detects you before you can complete the mission, we won't be able to extract you. I understand, Captain. Do you? Picard pressed. Because once you're inside that facility, you'll be facing technology designed specifically to contain and kill. The Romulans are not fools. They will have contingencies, traps, fail-safes we can't predict. You could be walking into a situation even you can't escape. Clark met his gaze steadily. Captain, I've faced doomsday weapons, alien invasions, and beings that could reshape reality. I've died and come back. I've failed and learned from it. This mission is dangerous, yes. But it's necessary. And I'm the only one who can do it. Worf stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. Mr. Kent, a moment. He unwrapped the cloth to reveal a Klingon combat knife. A mek'leth, its blade inscribed with Klingon symbols. This belonged to my brother, Worf said quietly. He died with honor defending civilians from a Romulan attack. I give this to you not because I believe you will need it as a weapon, but because it represents something important, the principle that some battles must be fought regardless of the cost, that honor sometimes demands we risk everything for those who cannot defend themselves. Clark accepted the blade carefully, feeling the weight of the gesture. I'll return it to you, Commander. See that you do. I would be displeased if you died in Romulan space. Was that concern in Worf's voice? Clark smiled slightly. I'll do my best not to disappoint you. Beverly approached last, holding a medical tricorder. I've programmed this to monitor your vital signs and broadcast them back to the Enterprise. If something happens, if you're injured or compromised, we'll know immediately. And a captain who understands that sometimes the right choice is the one that violates every rule in the book. Don't forget that. Clark felt something in his chest loosen slightly, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me yet. We still have to figure out how you're going to infiltrate one of the most secure facilities in the Romulan Empire, disable a weapon you've never encountered, and escape without triggering a war. Picard's expression turned wry. Compared to that, violating the Prime Directive is simple. 48 hours later, Clark stood in the Enterprise's shuttle bay, reviewing the plan one final time. Data had identified a weakness in the facility's quantum shielding, a harmonic frequency that Clark could potentially exploit using his heat vision at a precise wavelength. Geordi had determined that the Valerian weapon's containment could be disrupted by exposure to specific radiation patterns, essentially causing it to neutralize itself without detonating. In theory, the margin for error is extremely small, Data explained, his golden eyes reflecting concern, as much as an android could show. If your heat vision varies by more than 0.03 angstroms from the calculated frequency, the quantum barrier will hold. If you disrupt the Valerian containment incorrectly, you may trigger a cascade reaction that kills everything within 50 kilometers. No pressure, Clark said with a slight smile. Geordi adjusted his visor nervously. Clark, I've calibrated this resonance emitter to help you maintain the correct frequency. It'll give you real-time feedback, but you'll need to control your heat vision with precision I'm not sure is humanly possible. Good thing I'm not human, Clark replied, taking the small device and attaching it to his belt. Picard approached, his expression serious. Mr. Kent. They shook hands, and then Clark stepped back, gave the assembled crew a final nod, and simply flew through the shuttle bay force field, into the darkness of space, toward the Romulan Star Empire and a confrontation that would test everything he believed about heroism, sacrifice, and the price of doing what's right in a universe that didn't always reward it. Behind him, on the Enterprise bridge, Picard watched him go. Godspeed, Superman, he whispered. We're all counting on you. And in the shadows of Romulan space, the Tal-Shir watched their sensors, waiting for the moment when the being from another reality would dare to challenge the Empire's might. They would not have to wait long. The Romulan facility designated Shadow Forge hung in the darkness between stars, orbiting a dead moon in a system so remote that even the Empire's own charts labeled it as uninhabited research zone. Clark approached at sublight speeds, his enhanced vision picking out details that would be invisible to standard sensors. The quantum phase generators creating a spatial distortion field, the defense satellites positioned in overlapping coverage patterns, the garrison ships on patrol routes designed to catch any intruder. He'd been flying for 8 hours, navigating carefully through Romulan space, using asteroid fields and stellar phenomena to mask his energy signature. Data's calculations had provided him with a route that minimized detection risk, but Clark knew the Tal Shiar weren't fools. They'd anticipated infiltration attempts. The question was whether they'd anticipated him. Through his comm link, Data's voice provided real-time analysis. "Mr. Kent, I am detecting 6 Romulan scout ships in patrol formation around the facility. Their sensor sweeps are overlapping in a pattern that suggests they are specifically watching for small, high-velocity objects. They know I'm coming. Unknown. However, the Tal Shiar would be negligent not to consider the possibility after your intervention with the science vessel. I recommend extreme caution." Clark slowed his approach, drifting behind a large asteroid. His X-ray vision penetrated the facility's outer hull, revealing the internal structure, 3 levels, each separated by quantum-reinforced bulkheads. The Valerian weapon was on the lowest level, a spherical device approximately 3 meters in diameter, surrounded by exotic containment equipment. And everywhere, guards. Romulan soldiers in tactical gear, their disruptor rifles modified with some kind of energy amplification technology. Scientists working at consoles, monitoring readouts that Clark couldn't interpret from this distance. And in the center of it all, a Romulan commander whose uniform marked her as Tal Shiar, observing everything with the cold calculation of a predator. "I see the weapon," Clark reported quietly. "It's heavily guarded. Getting to it without being detected is going to be difficult." "Perhaps detection is inevitable," Picard's voice came through the comm. "The question is whether you can complete the mission before they can mount an effective response." Before Clark could respond, every alarm in the facility suddenly blazed to life. Klaxons wailed. Defense satellites reoriented, their weapons arrays powering up. The garrison ships broke formation, accelerating toward his position. They'd found him. "Mr. Kent," massive energy spike from the facility. Data's voice carried urgency. "They are activating the quantum barrier at full strength. If you do not penetrate it in the next 47 seconds, you will be unable to reach the weapon." Clark didn't hesitate. He burst from behind the asteroid, accelerating to a significant fraction of light speed. Disruptor fire lanced through space around him, brilliant green beams that would vaporize a standard shuttlecraft. He weaved through the barrage, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to predict firing patterns and adjust his trajectory. A direct hit caught him in the shoulder. The energy dispersed across his invulnerable skin, barely registering as more than uncomfortable warmth. But it slowed him fractionally, and fractions mattered when you were racing against a closing door. The quantum barrier shimmered into existence, a translucent wall of exotic energy that would phase shift anything trying to pass through into a parallel dimension, effectively making the facility unreachable. Clark's heat vision blazed, tuned to the precise frequency Geordi had calculated. The red beam struck the barrier, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then reality rippled. A gap opened. Barely large enough for Clark to slip through, and he dove toward it with everything he had. "You cannot shut it down," she said. "The encryption is quantum locked. Breaking it would take hours, even for your Federation's best computers." "Good thing I'm not trying to break it," Clark replied. He approached the weapon carefully, his enhanced vision examining its internal structure. The Valerian particles were contained in a magnetic bottle, suspended in a quantum field that would collapse when the timer reached 0. Once collapsed, the particles would interact with local matter and release their deadly radiation. Geordi's plan had been to introduce a specific radiation pattern that would neutralize the Valerian particles before they could fully activate. But that required precision calibration and time they didn't have. So Clark chose a different approach. He grabbed the entire weapon, 3 meters of exotic technology, magnetic containment, and apocalyptic potential, and flew straight up, punching through deck after deck of the facility's folded space interior. Alarms screamed. The Tal Shiar commander shouted something in Romulan that probably wasn't complimentary. And through it all, the countdown continued. 37 seconds. Clark burst through the facility's outer hull, venting atmosphere and sending debris spinning into space. The garrison ships immediately opened fire, but he ignored them, focusing everything on speed and trajectory. 29 seconds. He accelerated away from the facility, away from the garrison ships, away from anything that might be harmed by what was about to happen. The weapon pulsed in his arms, its containment already beginning to fail as the detonation sequence reached critical stages. 19 seconds. Mr. Kent, what are you doing? Picard's voice carried concern and confusion. Getting this thing as far from populated space as possible, Clark replied, his voice strained. Even at reduced capacity, even with his powers still adapting. The barrier snapped shut behind him with a sound like thunder, and suddenly he was inside, tumbling through the facility's docking bay as alarms screamed and emergency bulkheads began to seal. Romulan soldiers opened fire immediately. Disruptor beams converged on him from multiple angles, and Clark felt the impact this time. These weapons were different from standard Romulan arms. Enhanced. Designed to penetrate enhanced defenses. They still weren't enough. Clark moved through the docking bay like a storm, disarming soldiers with precise applications of super speed and minimal force. He wouldn't kill these people, they were following orders, defending what they believed was a legitimate military facility. But he couldn't let them stop him either. A blast door descended, trying to trap him in the bay. Clark caught it with both hands, his muscles straining as hydraulic systems designed to move tons of reinforced uranium fought against Kryptonian strength. For a moment, the door actually held him, the technology was impressive, he'd give them that. Then his cells absorbed another pulse of stellar radiation from the nearby sun, and the door crumpled like aluminum foil. He was through, racing down corridors that twisted in ways that suggested the facility's interior didn't quite match its exterior dimensions. Romulan spatial engineering, folding space to create more volume than should exist. Clark's X-ray vision struggled to penetrate the exotic materials, forcing him to navigate by memory of the schematics data had provided. More soldiers. These ones had been waiting, prepared for his approach. They fired in coordinated volleys, trying to overwhelm even his defenses through concentrated firepower. And behind them, Clark saw something that made his blood run cold, a containment field generator, and trapped within it, 3 Romulan civilians. Hostages. Surrender, alien, a voice commanded through speakers. The Tal Shiar commander from earlier. His movements. Energy barriers sprouted in corridors, trying to slow him. Automated weapons tracked his position, forcing him to dodge or tank shots that grew increasingly potent. And then he was there, the lowest level, the chamber that housed the Valerian weapon. It was worse than the schematics had suggested. The spherical device pulsed with a sickly green light, and Clark's enhanced senses could detect the radiation even through its containment. A wrongness that made his cells recoil instinctively. This was a weapon designed to unmake life at its most fundamental level. Around it, a dozen Tal Shiar scientists worked frantically at consoles, their fingers flying across controls. And standing before the weapon itself, the commander from the view screen earlier. She was older than Clark had initially thought, perhaps in her 60s, with silver streaking her dark hair. But her eyes were sharp, calculating, and completely unafraid as she regarded him. "You're too late," she said calmly. "The weapon is armed. The countdown has begun. In 90 seconds, it will detonate, and this entire facility, and you, will be sterilized down to the molecular level. We anticipated you might reach this point. We've prepared accordingly. Clark's superhearing picked up the truth in her words. Deep within the device, mechanisms were engaging, exotic particles aligning for detonation. Geordi's plan to disrupt the containment assumed they'd have time for a careful, controlled shutdown. But 90 seconds wasn't careful. It was barely enough to attempt something desperate. Why? Clark asked, even as his mind raced through options. Why sacrifice yourself and your people? The commander smiled thinly. Because the Tal-Shir serves the Empire's future, not its present. This weapon must be tested. If the only test available is against ourselves, then we accept that sacrifice. Our deaths will provide the data needed to perfect the technology. And you? Her smile widened. You will die knowing you failed. That 50,000 colonists will follow. That your intervention achieved nothing. Captain, Clark said into his comm, I need options. Fast. Data's response was immediate. Mr. Kent, attempting to disrupt the containment now carries a 94% probability of catastrophic failure. However, I am detecting a subspace transporter signature activating within the facility. They are attempting to beam the weapon to the test site prematurely. Can you block it? Not from this distance. But if you could disable the transporter array before the cycle completes, it would trap the weapon in its current location. Then we could attempt a controlled shutdown. Clark's X-ray vision swept through the facility, finding the transporter room 2 levels up. 73 seconds on the countdown. Time enough to reach it, disable it, and return. Maybe. If nothing else went wrong. He moved. The Tal-Shir commander shouted orders, but Clark was already gone, blasting through the ceiling with enough force to shake the entire facility. Structural alarms joined the cacophony of warnings. He tore through the second level, scattering equipment and personnel, reached the transporter room in 4.2 seconds. The transporter was already cycling, its distinctive whine building toward the climax that would beam the weapon across space. Clark grabbed the primary power coupling and ripped it free, then systematically destroyed every backup system he could identify in 3 seconds of focused devastation. The transporter whine cut off abruptly. Transport blocked, data confirmed. The weapon remains in the facility. 51 seconds until detonation. Clark dropped back through the holes he'd created, landing in the weapon chamber. The Tal-Shir commander had drawn a disruptor, but she didn't fire. Perhaps recognizing the futility. Instead, she simply watched him with those calculating eyes. Or we execute these prisoners. They are traitors, like Farrell. Their deaths will be on your conscience. Clark froze, his mind racing. This was the trap Picard had warned about, not a physical trap, but a moral one. Stop to save the hostages, and he'd lose the time he needed to reach the weapon. Ignore them, and he'd become complicit in their murder. Through his comm link, he heard Troy's voice, strained with concentration. Clark, I can sense them. The hostages are terrified, but there's something else. Confusion. They don't know why they've been brought there. Because they're bait, Clark said quietly. The Tal-Shir are testing whether I'll sacrifice a few to save many. And? Picard asked. What's your answer? Clark looked at the soldiers, at the hostages beyond them, at the sealed bulkhead that separated him from the Valerian weapon. 37 seconds had elapsed since he entered the facility. He had perhaps 2 minutes before they could activate failsafes, relocate the weapon, or trigger contingencies that would make his mission impossible. I don't sacrifice anyone, he said. He moved in a blur, faster than the Romulans' enhanced weapons could track. First to the containment field generator, which he crushed with one hand while simultaneously catching 2 of the hostages who'd started to fall. The third hostage was grabbed by a soldier, a disruptor pressed to her temple. Don't. The soldier began. Clark's heat vision flashed, precision targeted, vaporizing the disruptor without touching the Romulan holding it. The soldier stared at his empty hand in shock, then wisely decided to run rather than continue the fight. Depositing the hostages in a storage room and sealing them inside for their protection, Clark turned back toward his primary objective. 73 seconds elapsed. The facility's defensive systems were adapting, learning from. He was pushing himself harder than he had since arriving in this universe. The G-forces should have liquefied a normal being. The radiation leaking from the degrading containment should have been lethal. For him, it was merely excruciating. 12 seconds. A nearby star, a red giant in its death throes, loomed ahead. Clark adjusted his trajectory, aiming for the star's chromosphere. If he could get the weapon close enough, perhaps the stellar radiation would interact with the Valerian particles, neutralizing them before they could fully activate. 7 seconds. The heat was incredible now, even for him. The star's outer atmosphere began to buffet him, exotic particles streaming past in torrents. His suit was scorching, his cape burning away. But he held on, kept flying, kept pushing the weapon deeper into the inferno. 3 seconds. Now would be a good time for a miracle, he muttered. 2 seconds. He released the weapon and reversed direction with every ounce of strength remaining, accelerating away from the star as fast as his cells could manage. 1 second. 0. The Valerian weapon detonated inside the red giant's chromosphere, and for a moment, the star itself seemed to scream. Radiation cascaded outward in wavelengths that shouldn't exist, interacting with stellar matter in ways that violated standard physics. Clark felt the shockwave catch him, felt the exotic particles wash over and through him, felt his cells struggle to process energy patterns they'd never encountered. And then it was over. The radiation dispersed, absorbed by the star's immense gravity and magnetic fields. The Valerian particles, exposed to stellar temperatures and pressure before they could fully activate, broke down into constituent elements that posed no threat. The weapon was neutralized. The test had failed. 50,000 colonists would live. Clark floated in space, his body aching in ways he hadn't experienced since facing doomsday. His suit was in tatters, his skin reddened from radiation exposure that would have killed anything organic. But he was alive. And more importantly, he'd succeeded. Enterprise, he said hoarsely into his comm, mission accomplished. Weapon neutralized. I'm going to need a minute before I fly back. Take all the time you need, Mr. Kent, Picard replied, and was that relief in his voice. We're reading your vital signs. Dr. Crusher says you'll recover, though she strongly recommends you avoid exposing yourself to stellar detonations in the future. I'll keep that in mind. Through his fading vision, Clark saw the Shadow Forge facility in the distance, venting atmosphere, its quantum barrier failing. The garrison ships were withdrawing, presumably to report the catastrophic failure to their superiors. And somewhere in that facility, the Tal Shir commander was realizing that her grand plan had been undone by one being who refused to accept that some sacrifices were necessary. As Clark's cells slowly absorbed clean stellar radiation and began the healing process, he allowed himself a small smile. He'd saved 50,000 people. He'd stopped a weapon of mass destruction. And he'd done it without starting a war. Maybe, just maybe, he was learning to be Superman in this universe after all. Clark materialized in the Enterprise's transporter room 3 hours later, his body still radiating residual heat from stellar exposure. Dr. Crusher was waiting with a medical team, tricorder already scanning before he'd fully solidified. Don't even think about telling me you're fine, she said sharply. Your cellular structure is showing damage patterns I've never seen. You're coming to sickbay. Now. Every cell ached, his vision kept flickering between normal and X-ray, and there was a persistent ringing in his ears that suggested his enhanced hearing had been temporarily overloaded. In sickbay, Beverly's scans revealed the extent of the damage. Your cells are regenerating, but they're doing it in ways that don't make biological sense. It's like watching a time-lapse of evolution. Your body is adapting to the Valerian radiation exposure, learning from it, building resistances. That's how Kryptonian physiology works, Clark explained, wincing as she applied something to the burns on his arms. We adapt. Get stronger from what doesn't kill us. Convenient. Terrifying, but convenient. She paused, her expression softening. You could have died out there, you know. That much radiation, even for you. But I didn't. And 50,000 people are alive because of it. 43 people at the Drellian colony weren't, Beverly said quietly. You can't save everyone, Clark. No one can. I know. But I can save the ones I can reach. That has to be enough. Beverly finished her treatment and stepped back. You'll be fully recovered in about 12 hours. Until then, light duty only. And Clark? Thank you. For what you did. As he left sickbay, Clark found the senior staff assembled in the corridor, clearly waiting for him. Picard stepped forward first. Mr. Kent, well done. Your mission was successful, and you've prevented a catastrophe. However, his expression grew serious. We need to discuss the aftermath. The Romulans know you infiltrated their facility. The Tal Shiar won't take this lightly. I'm aware, Captain. Are you? Worf interjected. The Tal Shiar does not forgive. They will send operatives after you. Assassins. They will study the data from Shadow Forge, determine your vulnerabilities, and exploit them without mercy. Let them try, Clark said, though without bravado. Simply stating fact. Data tilted his head. Mr. Kent, there is another complication. While you were recovering, we received word from Starfleet intelligence. The Romulan Senate is demanding an explanation for what they're calling an unprovoked attack on a sovereign Romulan research facility. They claim you destroyed valuable scientific equipment and killed 17 personnel. Clark's jaw clenched. I didn't kill anyone. I went out of my way to avoid casualties. I know, Data said. However, the Tal Shiar has apparently executed 17 scientists and claimed you did it. They are using your intervention as justification for increased military readiness along the neutral zone. The Romulan fleet is mobilizing. The implications settled over Clark like a weight. He'd prevented one atrocity, but the Tal Shiar had twisted it into pretext for another. The political machinery he tried to circumvent was grinding into motion anyway. So I made things worse, he said quietly. No, Picard said firmly. You saved lives. The Tal Shiar's response, their lies, their escalation, that's on them, not you. Don't let them make you doubt the righteousness of your action. But the captain is correct that we now face a delicate situation, Riker added. The Romulans are demanding your extradition. Starfleet is being pressured to hand you over for trial in the Empire. Admiral Nechayev has ordered us to return to Earth immediately for diplomatic consultations. I won't hide behind Starfleet while innocent people face consequences for my actions, Clark said. They're on a direct course for Earth. And sir, the officer's voice carried barely suppressed fear. They're broadcasting a message. They're asking for Superman by name. The bridge fell silent. Everyone turned to look at Clark, and he saw in their faces what he'd seen before in other heroes, other teams, the recognition that the enemy had come specifically for one of them, and everything that meant. The Borg, Data explained for Clark's benefit, his voice unusually grave, are a collective consciousness of cybernetic beings. They assimilate other species, adding their biological and technological distinctiveness to their own. They have no concept of mercy, negotiation, or individual rights. They are, quite simply, the most dangerous threat the Federation has ever faced. And they want me, Clark said quietly. They want to assimilate you, Picard corrected, his face tight with old memories. To add your capabilities to the collective. Mr. Kent, a Borg drone with your powers would be unstoppable. They could assimilate entire civilizations in hours. It would be the end of everything. Clark met Picard's eyes and saw something there, trauma, fear, but also determination. This was personal for the captain. The Borg had touched him in ways that still left scars. Then we don't let them have me, Clark said simply. What's our tactical situation? On the bridge, the main viewscreen displayed the Borg cube, a massive structure, each edge measuring over 3 kilometers, bristling with technology that seemed to ignore conventional physics. It moved through space with the inevitability of a glacier, and wherever it went, resistance crumbled. They're still 8 hours from Earth at their current speed, Riker reported. Starfleet is mobilizing every available ship, but we all know how this goes. The Borg adapt to our weapons. They're stronger after every encounter. Have they adapted to me? Clark asked. Data consulted his console. Unknown. However, the Borg are aware of your existence. They must have intercepted sensor data from your previous encounters. They will have formulated preliminary adaptation strategies. Picard turned to Clark, and for a moment, the weight of command seemed to age him visibly. Mr. Kent, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Can you destroy a Borg cube? Clark considered. A ship 3 kilometers on each side, filled with thousands of drones, constructed from materials designed to withstand weapons that could vaporize planets. His powers were still recovering from the stellar exposure. His understanding of Borg technology was limited to what he'd been told in the last 5 minutes. I don't know, he admitted. But I'm willing to try. That's not good enough, Worf said bluntly. If you fail, if the Borg adapt to your capabilities and assimilate you, the Federation falls. Earth falls. Everything falls. Then I won't fail. You cannot guarantee that. No, Clark agreed. But I can guarantee that I'll fight with everything I have. Sometimes that's all anyone can do. Picard was silent for a long moment, and Clark could see the calculation happening, weighing risks, considering alternatives, bearing the burden of decisions that could doom billions. Finally, he nodded. Very well. But you won't face them alone. The Enterprise will engage alongside you. And Mr. Kent, Picard's voice hardened with resolve. If it becomes clear that the Borg are about to assimilate you, I will order every weapon on this ship to fire on your position. I will destroy you myself rather than let you become their weapon. Do you understand? Clark understood perfectly. Picard was asking him to accept that if things went wrong, his new friends would kill him. It was the responsible call, the tactical necessity, the price of failure. Clark materialized in the Enterprise's transporter room 3 hours later, his body still radiating residual heat from stellar exposure. Dr. Crusher was waiting with a medical team, tricorder already scanning before he'd fully solidified. Don't even think about telling me you're fine, she said sharply. Your cellular structure is showing damage patterns I've never seen. You're coming to sickbay. Now. Clark didn't argue. The truth was, he felt like he'd gone 12 rounds with Darkseid. Every cell ached, his vision kept flickering between normal and X-ray, and there was a persistent ringing in his ears that suggested his enhanced hearing had been temporarily overloaded. In sickbay, Beverly's scans revealed the extent of the damage. Your cells are regenerating, but they're doing it in ways that don't make biological sense. It's like watching a time-lapse of evolution. Your body is adapting to the Valerian radiation exposure, learning from it, building resistances. That's how Kryptonian physiology works, Clark explained, wincing as she applied something to the burns on his arms. We adapt. Get stronger from what doesn't kill us. Convenient. Terrifying, but convenient. She paused, her expression softening. You could have died out there, you know. That much radiation, even for you. But I didn't. And 50,000 people are alive because of it. 43 people at the Drellian colony weren't, Beverly said quietly. You can't save everyone, Clark. No one can. I know. But I can save the ones I can reach. That has to be enough. Beverly finished her treatment and stepped back. You'll be fully recovered in about 12 hours. Until then, light duty only. And Clark? Thank you. For what you did. As he left sickbay, Clark found the senior staff assembled in the corridor, clearly waiting for him. Picard stepped forward first. Mr. Kent, well done. Your mission was successful, and you've prevented a catastrophe. However, his expression grew serious. We need an entire civilization's political structure, Clark replied. One is crisis response. The other is colonialism dressed up as transparency. Troy spoke up, her voice thoughtful. He's right, Captain. If we release this information, we're not just exposing the Tal Shiar, we're weaponizing truth to achieve a specific political outcome. That's a dangerous precedent. The alternative, Varel said, frustration clear in her voice, is that the Tal Shiar continues operating in the shadows. They'll rebuild the weapon. They'll conduct the test on a different colony. And eventually, they'll use it to threaten the Federation or any other power that opposes them. Is that better? The debate continued for several minutes, voices rising and falling as the ethical complexities mounted. Clark listened, learning how these people navigated moral gray areas, how they balanced competing principles when both sides had valid points. Finally, Picard held up his hand for silence. We will present the information to Starfleet Command and let them make the determination about public release. It's above our pay grade to decide the fate of interstellar politics. He turned to Clark. As for you, Mr. Kent, you need to prepare for difficult conversations. Admiral Nechayev will want a full accounting of your actions. And there will be others, politicians, military leaders, intelligence officials, all wanting to know what you are and what you intend. I intend to keep helping people, Captain. Same as always. I know. But the universe you found yourself in doesn't make that simple. Every action you take ripples outward in ways you can't predict or control. That's the burden of power in a complex political landscape. Before Clark could respond, the ship's alarms blared. Red alert. Worf's comm badge chirped urgently. Bridge to Captain Picard. We have an emergency. A Borg cube has just dropped out of transwarp near the neutral zone. If the Romulans want to talk, I'll talk to them directly. That would be inadvisable, Worf growled. The Tal Shiar would like nothing more than to get you on Romulan soil. You would never leave alive. Commander Worf is correct, came a new voice. Everyone turned to see Sub-Commander Varel approaching, flanked by two of her fellow defectors. The Tal Shiar cannot allow you to exist, Superman. You represent everything they fear. Power they cannot control, principles they cannot corrupt, a symbol that could inspire resistance within the Empire itself. Then what do you suggest? Clark asked. Varel held up another data chip. I suggest we go public. Everything. The Valerian weapon, the illegal research, the planned genocide of the test colony, the scientists the Tal Shiar executed to cover their tracks. We released this information to the Federation News Service, to independent journalists, to every government and news outlet in known space. We strip away the Tal Shiar's lies and force the Romulan Senate to investigate. Picard considered this carefully. Such a release would be explosive. It could destabilize Romulan internal politics. Possibly trigger a civil conflict between the Senate and the Tal Shiar. Good, Varel said coldly. The Tal Shiar has operated without oversight for too long. Perhaps it's time the Romulan people knew what horrors are being committed in their name. That's not our decision to make, Clark said, surprising everyone. Releasing this information could cause exactly the kind of interference in Romulan sovereignty that the Prime Directive warns against. We'd be choosing sides in an internal political struggle. Picard's eyebrow rose. Mr. Kent, 2 hours ago you violated Romulan sovereignty by infiltrating a military facility. Now you're concerned about political interference. There's a difference between stopping an immediate threat and manipulating. Their individuality stripped away, forced to serve a consciousness that cared nothing for their hopes, dreams, or autonomy. Then we save who we can, he said. And we stop them from taking anyone else. Picard smiled slightly, sadly. You're an optimist, Mr. Kent. I hope this universe doesn't break you of that. It won't, Captain. Because if I stop believing people can be saved, I stop being Superman. And that's one thing I won't let anyone. Not the Borg, not the Tal Shiar, not this entire universe, take from me. The Enterprise surged forward through the darkness, racing toward a confrontation that would test everything Clark believed about heroism, sacrifice, and the possibility of redemption even in the face of absolute darkness. Behind them, Romulan space settled into uneasy quiet. Ahead, the Borg cube waited with the patience of the inevitable. And in between, a man from another universe prepared to discover whether hope was stronger than adaptation, whether willpower could overcome assimilation, whether one being could make a difference against an enemy that had conquered galaxies. The answer would determine the fate of billions. The Enterprise dropped out of warp 200,000 kilometers from the Borg cube, and for the first time since arriving in this universe, Clark felt genuine fear. The cube hung in space like a monument to inevitability, massive, geometric, absolutely devoid of aesthetic considerations beyond brutal functionality. Its surface crawled with energy, conduits pulsing with sickly green light, structures extruding and retracting as the ship continuously rebuilt itself. And from it emanated a presence that Clark's enhanced senses detected as a low-frequency hum that seemed to bypass his ears entirely and resonate directly in his mind. Thousands of voices, speaking in perfect unison. Thinking in perfect unison. Being in perfect unison. We are the Borg, came the transmission, that terrible chorus of the assimilated. Superman of Earth. Your biological and technological distinctiveness will be added to our own. You will be made into the perfect synthesis of organic power and Borg efficiency. Resistance is futile. Clark stood on the bridge, every muscle tense. They're not negotiating. They're just stating what they believe will happen. The Borg don't negotiate, Picard said quietly, his hands gripping the arms of his command chair. They don't threaten or bluster. They simply assert inevitability and then make it reality. His eyes met Clark's. When they say resistance is futile, they're not trying to demoralize you. They genuinely believe it's a statement of fact. Then we'll prove them wrong. Clark moved toward the view screen. What's the tactical situation? Data's fingers flew across his console. The cube is maintaining position equidistant between our location and Earth. Starfleet reinforcements are 17 minutes away. They are scanning us intensively, specifically scanning you, Mr. Kent. I believe they are attempting to formulate adaptation strategies before engagement. How fast can they adapt? Extremely fast, Worf reported grimly. In previous. Watching as the medical teams work to free another drone from the collective's grip. In my universe, I learned a long time ago that I can't save everyone. But I never learned to be okay with it. Good, Picard said, entering the observation area. The day you become okay with loss is the day you stop being Superman. He stood beside Clark, also watching the medical procedures. You've had quite a journey since arriving on my ship, Mr. Kent. First contact with the Federation, preventing a genocide, facing the Borg. Most beings would be overwhelmed. Most beings don't have my advantages. No, but most beings with your advantages would have used them differently. Power without conscience leads to tyranny. Power without wisdom leads to catastrophe. But you, Picard smiled slightly. You use your power the way we aspire to use ours. With restraint. With principle. With hope that even in the darkest circumstances, redemption is possible. I learned from good teachers, Clark said. My parents taught me that having power meant having responsibility. That being different wasn't an excuse to be cruel or indifferent. That the strong protect the weak not because they have to, but because they should. Wise parents. Picard paused, then continued in a more serious tone. The battle today has consequences. The Borg know about you now. They'll adapt, prepare for future encounters. They'll share your tactical profile across the entire collective. Next time, they won't be caught off guard. I know. And the Romulans won't have forgotten about the Shadow Forge incident. The Tal Shiar is likely planning retribution as we speak. You've made powerful enemies, Mr. Kent. Story of my life, Captain. Yes, but in your universe, you had allies. The Justice League, if I remember correctly from your descriptions. Here, you're the only one with your particular capabilities. That isolation could be dangerous. Correct, the Borg responded through the new drones. We have analyzed your cellular energy absorption patterns. We are now generating wavelengths that inhibit rather than enhance your capabilities. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. On the Enterprise bridge, Picard watched the tactical display with growing alarm. He's slowing down. His energy output is decreasing. They're neutralizing his advantage. Captain, Worf said, we should fire on the cube while Mr. Kent distracts them. It may be our only opportunity. No, Troy interjected. Clark is surrounded by drones. Any attack powerful enough to damage the cube risks killing him too. Picard's mind raced through scenarios, each one ending badly. The Borg were adapting faster than anticipated. Soon they'd overwhelm Clark with sheer numbers and specialized countermeasures. Once they had him, they'd assimilate his genetic template, clone his abilities, create an army of Kryptonian drones that could conquer the Federation in weeks. Unless. Mr. Data, the collective's hive mind, it operates through a subspace network, correct? Correct, Captain. Borg drones maintain constant communication with the collective via transwarp subspace frequencies. Severing that connection renders individual drones inert or at least significantly less coordinated. Can we disrupt it? Even temporarily? Data considered. Theoretically, yes. However, we would need to generate a subspace pulse of extraordinary magnitude. The power requirements would exceed our capacity by several orders of. He paused, his golden eyes widening fractionally. Unless we utilized an alternative power source. Mr. Kent generates significant electromagnetic output when using his heat vision. If he could be persuaded to channel that energy at specific frequencies while we amplified it through our deflector array. We could jam the Borg network, Picard finished. Mr. Worf, open a channel to. From each other. Except the Borg had been adapting so rapidly, rerouting so many systems to counter Clark's abilities, that they'd created vulnerabilities in their own infrastructure. Mr. Kent, you need to evacuate immediately, Picard's voice carried alarm. That cube is experiencing catastrophic systems failure. It's going to. The cube detonated. Not all at once, but in a progressive collapse as antimatter containment failed and exotic energy systems went critical. Clark tried to fly clear, but the explosion caught him, hurled him through space like a leaf in a hurricane. He tumbled end over end, his senses overloaded by radiation, concussive force, and the screams of thousands of Borg drones dying as their prison ship tore itself apart. Through the chaos, he saw escape pods, small Borg craft ejecting from the dying cube. Not all the drones had perished in the initial explosion. Some were fleeing, their survival instincts somehow overriding the collective's usual indifference to individual preservation. They needed help. Despite his injuries, despite the pain radiating through every cell, despite common sense screaming at him to get to safety, Clark changed trajectory. He intercepted the nearest escape pod, grabbed it with hands that shook from exertion, and began guiding it away from the exploding cube. "What are you doing?" Worf demanded over the comm. "Let them go. They are Borg. They're people trapped in Borg bodies," Clark countered, grabbing another pod. "And I'm not leaving them to die." One by one, he collected the escape pods, 17 in total, and transported them to a safe distance from the destruction. The Enterprise moved in to provide cover, shields extended to protect both the pods and Clark from debris. When the cube finally finished its death throes, dissolving into expanding clouds of gas and twisted metal, Clark floated among the wreckage, exhausted beyond measure but alive. The power balance shifted. Clark broke free of the tractor beam and accelerated toward the cube, moving faster than their systems could track. He hit the hull with the force of a photon torpedo. Metal crumpled. Structures collapsed inward. A crater 30 meters wide appeared where he'd impacted, exposing interior corridors filled with Borg drones that were immediately vented into space. But rather than dying, they simply activated magnetic boots and continued working, repairing the damage with mechanical efficiency even in hard vacuum. "Fascinating," Data's voice came through the comm badge on Clark's tattered suit. "Mr. Kent, your impact registered on our sensors as equivalent to approximately 85 photon torpedoes. The cube's structural integrity field is compensating, but you have definitely gained their attention." Indeed he had. From every opening in the cube, Borg drones began emerging, not fleeing, but moving with deliberate purpose toward Clark's position. They wore various forms: humanoid, insectoid, even mechanical chassis that barely resembled organic origins, but all shared the same cybernetic implants, the same green-lit optical sensors, the same terrible unity of purpose. "We are Borg," they said in unison, hundreds of voices speaking as one. "You will be assimilated. Your biological distinctiveness will be added to our own." The first drone reached Clark and grabbed his arm with a strength that suggested significant mechanical enhancement. Assimilation tubules extended from its hand, nanoprobe injectors designed to convert organic tissue into Borg components. They pressed against Clark's skin and broke. The drone tilted its head in what might have been confusion if the Borg felt such emotions. It tried again with the same result. Clark's Kryptonian cellular structure simply rejected the nanoprobes, his immune system treating them like any other foreign pathogen and destroying them at the molecular level. Encounters: Borg shields have adapted to phaser frequencies within 3 to 4 shots. Photon torpedoes are effective for slightly longer, but they eventually adapt to those as well. Our only advantage is that they've never encountered Kryptonian biology before. But they will adapt, Clark said, understanding the implication. "Which means my first hits need to count." Picard stood, moving to stand beside Clark. "Mr. Kent, the Borg are unlike any opponent you've likely faced. They don't feel pain, fear, or hesitation. They coordinate with perfect efficiency across thousands of drones. And they learn from every encounter. The longer you fight them, the more they'll understand your capabilities. Then I need to end this fast." Clark turned to face the captain. "Sir, requesting permission to engage the cube directly." "Denied. We go in together. Mr. Worf, load all torpedo tubes with rotating frequency modulation. Randomize our phaser cycles. Make them work for their adaptations." "Aye, Captain." The Enterprise moved forward, and the Borg cube responded immediately. A tractor beam lanced out, emerald energy attempting to seize the ship and pull it in for assimilation. Picard ordered evasive maneuvers, but the beam tracked them with inhuman precision. Clark didn't wait for orders. He was through the view screen. Not breaking it, just phasing through it in a way that suggested his powers were still learning tricks from this universe's physics, and into space. The tractor beam shifted instantly, abandoning the Enterprise to focus on him. He felt it grab him, a pressure that wrapped around his entire body like a giant's fist. For a moment, he fought it, his muscles straining against exotic energies designed to move starships. The beam held, actually held, and Clark realized with alarm that Borg technology was already adapting to his strength level, increasing power output to compensate. Then his cells absorbed another pulse of solar radiation from the nearby star, and... "Sorry," Clark said, gently removing the drone's hand from his arm. "I'm not compatible with your technology." The Borg's response was immediate. More drones swarmed him, dozens becoming hundreds, all attempting different assimilation methods. Some used focused energy beams to weaken his cellular cohesion. Others employed exotic particles that should have disrupted molecular bonds. Still others tried brute force, attempting to physically restrain him while their technology sought purchase. None of it worked. Clark moved through them like water through a net, careful not to kill. These were victims, people stolen from their lives and forced into slavery. But he disabled, broke mechanisms, crushed circuitry, systematically working to reduce the threat they represented without ending the lives that might still be saved. And all the while, the cube was learning. "Mr. Kent," Data's voice carried urgency, "the Borg have modified their approach. They are no longer attempting standard assimilation. Instead, they are deploying specialized drones equipped with what appears to be anti-Kryptonian countermeasures." "How?" "They've known about me for less than 24 hours. The Borg collective spans thousands of worlds and assimilates billions of beings. They have undoubtedly encountered species with similar physiological advantages. They are extrapolating from that data and adapting in real time." Clark saw what data meant. New drones emerged from the cube's interior, these ones different from standard Borg. Their skin was darkened, their power sources modified. And when they approached, Clark felt something he hadn't experienced since leaving his universe: weakness. His strength flagged. His vision blurred. The cosmic radiation he'd been absorbing from nearby stars suddenly felt muted, filtered, as if something was blocking his access to it. Red sun radiation, he realized aloud. They're emitting radiation patterns similar to Krypton's sun. It's dampening my powers. "Mr. Kent. Encrypted, I don't want the Borg intercepting." On the cube's surface, Clark was being overwhelmed. The red sun radiation was sapping his strength faster than he could compensate. Drones grabbed him, held him, and though he could still break free, each time was harder than the last. His vision was fading, his superhearing diminishing, his invulnerability becoming merely enhanced durability. He was losing. Then Picard's voice cut through the calm, clear and urgent. "Mr. Kent, listen carefully. We need you to use your heat vision at a specific frequency. Data is transmitting the wavelength to your comm badge now. When you fire, aim toward the Enterprise. We're going to amplify your output and use it to disrupt the Borg network. I'm barely holding on here, Captain. I don't know if I have enough power left." "You do," Picard said firmly. "Because you have to. Those drones, every single one of them was a person once. Someone with hopes, dreams, families. They deserve better than to be slaves to the collective. You said we save who we can. Now's your chance to prove it." Clark felt something ignite in his chest, not solar radiation, but something deeper. Purpose. The reminder of why he fought, what he stood for, who he was. Even here, millions of light years from home, in a universe where everything was different, some truths remained constant. Heroes didn't give up. They found a way. He stopped fighting defensively and instead focused everything inward, drawing on his cellular reserves, on the residual radiation still stored in his body, on the raw willpower that had let him move planets and stop doomsday and face gods without flinching. The red sun radiation weakened him, yes, but it didn't erase what he was. His eyes blazed crimson. The heat vision that erupted wasn't just focused light. It was concentrated solar fury, modulated to the exact frequency data had specified, channeled through determination that bordered on defiance of physical law. The beams lanced across space toward the Enterprise, and Geordi LaForge's modified deflector array caught them, amplified them, shaped them into a subspace pulse that crashed into the Borg cube like a tidal wave. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every drone on the cube's surface froze mid-motion. The constant background hum of the collective's communication suddenly went silent. Individual Borg, cut off from the hive mind for the first time in years, perhaps decades, stood motionless, their cybernetic implants trying desperately to re-establish connection. "It's working," Riker shouted from the bridge. "The Borg network is disrupted. How long will it last?" Picard demanded. "Unknown, sir. The Borg are already adapting, attempting to route around the jamming signal. I estimate we have approximately 90 seconds before they fully compensate." 90 seconds. Clark didn't waste them. He moved through the frozen drones, his returning strength allowing for speed and precision he hadn't managed before. His heat vision carved through the cube's hull, targeting critical systems data had identified, power distribution nodes, processing centers, the transwarp coils that allowed faster-than-light travel. Everywhere he struck, the Borg's adaptive regeneration struggled to keep pace. But he wasn't trying to destroy the cube. He was trying to cripple it. "Enterprise," he called out, "I'm heading for the interior. There should be a central nexus where the cube coordinates its systems. If I can damage that—" "Mr. Kent, be advised," Data interrupted, "the central nexus will be heavily defended and shielded. Furthermore, Borg cubes have redundant systems. Even significant damage may not." An explosion rocked the cube. Not from Clark's assault, but from within, a chain reaction cascading through power systems that should have been isolated. Clark turned to face Picard fully. "Are you saying I should leave? Find a way back to my universe?" "I'm saying you should consider whether this universe is where you belong. Whether the good you can do here outweighs the destabilization your presence causes." Picard held up his hand as Clark started to object. "I'm not suggesting you're unwelcome. Far from it. But you need to think carefully about your future. You've saved thousands of lives in the few days since your arrival. You've also started diplomatic incidents, violated treaties, and made yourself a target for every hostile force in the quadrant. So what do you recommend?" Picard considered carefully. "I recommend you stop trying to be Superman the way you were in your universe and start being Superman the way this universe needs. Learn our politics, understand our constraints, work within our frameworks when possible. And when it's not possible, when crisis demands immediate action, act with the full knowledge of the consequences and be prepared to face them. That's what I've been doing." "Yes, but instinctively. Reactively. What I'm suggesting is that you become strategic. Deliberate. Use your unique position, not bound by Starfleet regulations, but allied with Federation principles, to be the bridge between power and policy." Picard smiled. "In short, Mr. Kent, I'm offering you a role. Consultant was always temporary. What I'm proposing is something more permanent. An independent operator who works with Starfleet when our interests align, but who isn't constrained by our bureaucracy when rapid action is required." Clark absorbed this. "You want me to be your off-the-book superhero. I want you to be exactly what you are. A being of extraordinary capability and unwavering principle, but integrated into this universe's political reality in a way that maximizes your effectiveness while minimizing unintended consequences." Picard's expression grew earnest. "Mr. Kent, I've seen what you can do. More importantly, I've seen who you are. This universe needs people like you. But it also needs you to understand that good intentions aren't enough. Strategy matters. Diplomacy matters. Sometimes the right thing to do is the thing that prevents conflict rather than winning it. And when conflict is unavoidable, then we face it together. The Enterprise, Starfleet, and you, the man from another universe who refuses to let innocent people suffer when he has the power to prevent it. Picard extended his hand. What do you say, Mr. Kent? Ready to be Superman for an entire quadrant? Clark looked at the offered hand, then at the medical bay where 7 people were getting their lives back, then out at the stars that were becoming familiar even in their strangeness. He'd come to this universe by accident. But maybe, just maybe, there was a reason. A purpose. A role that only he could fill. He shook Picard's hand firmly. Let's save some lives, Captain. 3 weeks later, Clark stood in the Enterprise's observation lounge, watching a Federation Council session via subspace transmission. Admiral Nechayev sat at the center of the proceedings, her expression carefully neutral as she presented the case for formalizing Clark's status within Federation space. The being known as Superman represents an unprecedented situation, she was saying. A dimensional refugee with capabilities that exceed any known technology or species. The question before this council is simple: how do we integrate such a being into our society without compromising our principles or our security? Counselor T'Pran of Vulcan spoke, her voice carrying the cool logic of her people. The logical approach would be to offer formal Federation citizenship with all accompanying rights and responsibilities. This would bring Superman under our legal framework while respecting his autonomy. With respect, Counselor, Ambassador Thoris of Andoria countered, his antennae twitching with agitation, granting citizenship to a being who has already violated multiple Federation regulations sends the wrong message. We have laws for a reason. He also saved Earth from Borg assimilation, Counselor Z.H. Thane pointed out. That should count for something. The debate continued, voices rising and falling in the familiar rhythm of democratic process. Clark listened, struck by how similar it was to political arguments on his own Earth, different species, different technology, but the same fundamental tensions between security and freedom, principle and pragmatism. Picard entered the lounge quietly, standing beside Clark. They've been at it for 2 hours. The vote could go either way. What happens if they reject the proposal? Then you remain in legal limbo. Not a citizen, not quite a refugee, not bound by our laws but also not protected by them. It would make your position complicated. More complicated than it already is. Picard smiled slightly. Fair point. Isn't a choice, Captain. That's me out there. My responsibility. My burden. Clark met Picard's eyes. You said this universe needs Superman. Well, now it needs him to stop another Superman. One who's everything I could have become if I'd chosen power over principle. Picard held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. Transporter room, lock onto Mr. Kent's signal. Beam him to Tarsus 7 on my mark. He turned back to Clark. For what it's worth, Mr. Kent. I don't believe you could have become that, regardless of circumstances. Some things are core to who we are. Choices define us, yes, but so do the values we refuse to compromise. I hope you're right, Captain. Clark moved toward the turbolift. Because I'm about to find out. As he stepped into the transporter room, Beverly caught up to him, holding a small device. Take this, she said, pressing it into his hand. It's an emergency medical beacon. If you're injured badly enough, we can beam you directly to sickbay. Thank you, Doctor. And Clark? She hesitated. Come back. Wesley still wants to meet his hero properly. Clark smiled despite the fear coiling in his gut. Tell Wesley that heroes don't win because they're strongest or fastest. They win because they never stop fighting for what's right. No matter what. He stepped onto the transporter pad, and O'Brien's hands moved across the controls. Energizing. Clark materialized on Tarsus VII's surface, in a field outside the main colony. The corrupted Superman, his evil doppelganger, was already there, floating above the ground with arms crossed, waiting. So, the Dark Superman said, his voice carrying contempt and curiosity in equal measure. You're what passes for Superman in this reality. I can sense your power, diminished, weakened by this universe's physics. You're not at full strength, are you? I'm strong enough, Clark replied, landing across from him. Are you? Because I've conquered 17 realities, each one falling before Kryptonian might. I've faced versions of myself before, the weak ones, the ones who cling to mortal concepts like justice and mercy. They all fell. You'll be no different. Maybe. But I'll fall fighting. Because that's what heroes do. The Dark Superman laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or humanity. Heroes? There are no heroes, only the strong and the weak. The rulers and the ruled. I chose to be strong. I chose to rule. And you, he gestured dismissively. You chose to serve mortals who fear and resent you. To limit yourself for beings who could never understand you. That makes you a fool, not a hero. No, Clark said quietly. It makes me human. The best parts of humanity, anyway. And that's something you forgot, if you ever knew it at all. Then let me remind you of something you seem to have forgotten. The Dark Superman's eyes blazed with heat vision, twin beams of concentrated energy that could vaporize mountains. Clark didn't dodge. He met the attack with his own heat vision, red beams clashing in the space between them, energy cascading outward in waves that scorched the ground and sent the colony's population scrambling for shelter. The battle that would determine the fate of this universe, and perhaps many others, had begun. And Clark knew, with absolute certainty, that this was the test he'd been preparing for since arriving. Not a test of strength or speed, but of principle. Of whether Superman, the real Superman, the one who stood for hope and justice and the belief that power should serve rather than dominate, could triumph over his own shadow. On the Enterprise, Picard watched the tactical display as two godlike beings clashed on the planet below, their conflict registering on sensors as energy outputs that rivaled stellar events. My God, Riker whispered. They're going to destroy that planet. Mr. Kent. We're all on trial, every day, judged by our choices and their consequences. Picard's expression softened. But you're not alone in it. You have allies now. This crew, Starfleet officers who've worked with you, the people you've saved who speak on your behalf. As if summoning them through mention, the observation lounge's door opened and several familiar faces entered. Beverly, Geordi, Worf, Counselor Troy. Even Chief O'Brien had come up from engineering. We heard the vote, Beverly said. Thought you might want company. Or celebration, Geordi added with a grin. You're officially one of us now. Sort of. I am pleased the council chose wisely, Worf said, which from a Klingon was practically effusive praise. Though I still believe you should carry proper weapons. Relying solely on your natural abilities is tactically unsound. I'll take that under advisement, Commander. Data tilted his head in that characteristic gesture of curiosity. Mr. Kent, if I may ask, now that you have been granted probationary citizenship, what do you intend to do? Will you remain aboard the Enterprise, or do you have other plans? It was the question Clark had been wrestling with for days. Picard had offered him a permanent position as a consultant, attached to the Enterprise but free to operate independently when necessary. Starfleet Command had suggested he join a specialized task force dealing with extraordinary threats. And part of him. The part that still remembered Metropolis, the Daily Planet, Lois, wanted nothing more than to find a way home. But home was millions of light years away, in another dimension entirely. The rift that had brought him here was gone, collapsed into quantum uncertainty. His Earth might as well not exist, at least not in any way he could reach. This universe, strange as it was, had become his reality. I'll stay with the Enterprise for now, Clark decided. Captain Picard has taught me a lot about how this universe. Clark decided. Captain Picard has taught me a lot about how this universe works. I figure I have more to learn before I strike out on my own. A wise choice, Picard said. And selfishly, I'm pleased. Having you aboard makes the Enterprise the most formidable vessel in Starfleet. Though I suspect our missions are about to become significantly more dangerous as a result. Why do you say that? Because word has spread about you, Mr. Kent. Every power in the quadrant knows that the Enterprise harbors Superman. Those who fear us will want to test you, find your limits. Those who need help will call for you specifically. We've become a symbol, of Federation power, of hope, of the possibility that even impossible situations can be resolved. No pressure, Clark said with a slight smile. Indeed. Picard raised a glass of Earl Grey tea. To Superman. May his presence in our universe bring more light than shadow. The others raised their drinks, synthahol for most, tea for Data who couldn't actually taste it but appreciated the social ritual. They toasted, and for a moment, Clark felt something he hadn't experienced since arriving, belonging. The moment was interrupted by an urgent hail from the bridge. Captain Picard, we're receiving a distress call from the colony on Tarsus 7. They report that a spatial anomaly has opened near their planet. Something is coming through, something big. Everyone moved immediately, the celebration forgotten as duty reasserted itself. On the bridge, the view screen displayed Tarsus 7, a modest colony world with a population of about 30,000. And orbiting it, a spatial rift pulsing with impossible energies. What am I looking at? Picard demanded. Unknown, sir, the tactical officer reported. The rift is generating energy signatures unlike anything in our database. It's similar to the anomaly that brought Mr. Kent to our universe, but orders of magnitude larger. Clark's enhanced vision focused on the rift, and what he saw made his heart stop. Through the tear in space, something was emerging. Not a ship, not a natural phenomenon, but a figure. Humanoid, massive, wreathed in cosmic fire. And as it fully materialized, Clark recognized the distinctive red cape, the stylized S on the chest, the face that was almost but not quite his own. Another Kryptonian. Another Superman. But this one's eyes glowed with malevolent red light, and the energy radiating from him spoke of corruption, of power wielded without conscience or restraint. No, Clark whispered. It can't be. Mr. Kent. Picard turned to him, seeing the recognition and horror on his face. Do you know what that is? Yes, Clark said quietly. That's me. Or a version of me from another reality. One where I didn't have the Kents to teach me right from wrong. One where I decided that might makes right, that humans needed to be ruled rather than protected. The corrupted Superman's voice boomed across space, amplified somehow to reach them despite the vacuum. I am Kal-El of Krypton, the figure declared. I have traveled across dimensional barriers to find this place, this reality where I sensed another of my kind. Superman of this universe, I offer you a choice. Join me in bringing order to the chaos of mortal existence, or stand aside while I do it alone. But know this, I will not be opposed. I am power incarnate, and this universe will bow before Krypton's might. On the Enterprise bridge, silence fell. Every eye turned to Clark, waiting to see how he would respond to this twisted mirror of himself. Clark stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. Captain, I need to get down there. Now. Mr. Kent, you're exhausted from the Borg encounter. Your powers are still recovering. Facing another Kryptonian in your condition. The transmission continued. Admiral Nechayev was presenting evidence now, data from the Drellian colony rescue, tactical analysis of the Shadow Forge infiltration, sensor logs from the Borg engagement. Each incident laid bare for the Council to judge. In each case, Nechayev concluded, Superman acted to preserve life and prevent catastrophe. His methods were unconventional, yes. He violated protocols, certainly. But the results speak for themselves. Thousands of lives saved, major threats neutralized, and minimal collateral damage. Whatever we decide today, we must acknowledge that this being has demonstrated both power and principle in equal measure. The Admiral is supporting you, Troy observed, having joined them. I sense genuine respect in her emotional state. You've won her over. Or she's just being practical, Clark replied. Better to have me working with the Federation than against it. Can it not be both? Data asked, entering with a PADD full of statistical analysis. Admiral Nechayev is a pragmatist, but she is also principled. She recognizes that your presence represents a variable that cannot be eliminated, only directed. Therefore, directing you toward productive ends serves both practical and moral purposes. The vote was called. Clark watched as each counselor cast their decision, the tally appearing on the screen in real time. It was close, far closer than he'd expected. Some species trusted him. Others feared him. Still others simply didn't know what to make of a being who didn't fit into any existing category. The final count, 7-6 in favor of granting probationary Federation citizenship. Probationary? Clark asked. It means you have most rights of a citizen, but your status will be reviewed annually, Picard explained. If you continue to demonstrate responsible behavior, it will become permanent. If you prove to be a destabilizing influence, it can be revoked. So I'm on trial. For the rest of my life. Welcome to democracy. No, Picard said quietly, his faith absolute. Clark won't let that happen. Whatever else occurs, he'll protect those colonists. It's who he is. But can he win? Picard didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice carried the weight of command and the hope of prayer. He has to. Because if Superman can't defeat his own darkness, then what hope do any of us have? The battle raged on, shaking the very foundations of Tarsus 7, as Clark Kent fought not just for this planet, not just for this universe, but for the soul of what Superman meant. And in that struggle, he would discover whether the lessons learned from Jonathan and Martha Kent, reinforced by Jean-Luc Picard and the crew of the Enterprise, were strong enough to overcome the seductive simplicity of power without conscience. The answer would reshape everything. Conclusion. The corrupted Superman fell. Not because Clark was stronger, he wasn't, not quite. Not because his heat vision burned hotter or his fist struck harder. But because when his dark counterpart chose to level half the colony to prove his point, Clark made a different choice. He caught the building. A residential tower, 40 stories, 300 people inside. The corrupted Superman had torn it from its foundations with contemptuous ease, hurling it toward the evacuation centers where thousands had gathered. It should have been a massacre. Instead, Clark was there. He hit the falling structure at an angle calculated in microseconds, redirecting its momentum without shattering it, his body becoming the fulcrum that transformed catastrophe into salvation. The building settled, impossibly, gently, into an empty field. Structural integrity compromised but intact. Everyone inside shaken but alive. And in that moment of distraction, of choosing to save rather than fight, the corrupted Superman struck. The blow caught Clark in the chest, sent him cratering into the ground with force that registered on the Enterprise's sensors as a 6.7 magnitude earthquake. Pain exploded through his ribs, actual pain, the kind his invulnerability usually prevented. The dark Superman was stronger, faster, more ruthless. And he was right there, fist raised for a killing strike. This is why you lose, the corrupted version snarled. Because you care more about them than victory. More about saving than surviving. Clark looked up at his twisted reflection, tasted copper in his mouth, felt his healing factor struggling to compensate. And smiled. You're right, he said. I do care more about them than victory. That's not why I lose. It's why I win. His heat vision, focused to a precision his counterpart had never bothered to master, struck not the corrupted Superman but the ground beneath him. Superheated rock exploded upward, and in the fraction of a second at the dark Superman. Clark's voice softened. Or until you remember that being Kryptonian doesn't mean we have to be conquerors. That power can serve instead of dominate. That Kal-El of Krypton can be more than just might incarnate. The dark Superman faltered. For just a moment, something flickered in those red glowing eyes, confusion, perhaps. Or the ghost of a conscience long buried under layers of justified tyranny. They took everything from me, he said quietly. The mortals in my reality. They feared me, turned on me, tried to destroy what I cared about. So I made them pay. I made them all pay. And did it help? Did ruling them through fear fill the emptiness? Did conquering 17 realities bring you peace? Silence. No, the corrupted Superman finally admitted. It didn't. But going back, admitting I was wrong, I can't. I've done too much. Become too much. You can always choose differently, Clark said. I learned that from people who saw an alien child fall from the stars and chose to raise him as their son. From a Starfleet captain who risked his career to defend someone he'd known for less than a day. From every person who's ever chosen compassion over expedience, principle over power. In my reality, those people are dead. I killed some of them myself. Then honor their memory by becoming someone they could have been proud of. It's not too late. It's never too late. The corrupted Superman looked at him, really looked, perhaps for the first time. Saw not an opponent but a mirror reflecting what he could have been. What he still might become. I don't know how, he whispered. Clark extended his hand. I'll show you. If you'll let me. For a long moment, the dark Superman stared at that offered hand. The gesture was absurd, a being of godlike power offering help to a multiversal tyrant. It should have been meaningless. Instead, slowly, hesitantly. Like someone remembering how to be human, the corrupted Superman reached out and took it. 2 days later, the Federation Council convened an emergency session to address the Superman situation, now plural. Picard stood before them, presenting a proposal that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier: allow the corrupted Superman to remain in Federation space under supervision, working to undo some of the harm he'd caused while learning to use his power responsibly. With respect, Captain, Counselor Pran said, you're asking us to trust a being who has conquered 17 realities. The logical probability of rehabilitation is low. Logic doesn't account for the transformative power of hope, Counselor, Picard replied. I've seen it happen. I was Locutus of Borg, complicit in the deaths of thousands. This crew never gave up on me. They found a way to bring me back. That was different. You were assimilated against your will. And he. Picard gestured to where both Supermen stood at the back of the chamber, was shaped by trauma and circumstance into something terrible. But he made a choice on Tarsus 7. To listen. To consider alternatives. To lower his fist when he could have kept fighting. That deserves a chance. The debate continued for hours. In the end, the vote was close again, but it passed. The corrupted Superman, who had quietly asked to be called Kal rather than carry the title he'd perverted, would remain under Clark's supervision. A second Kryptonian in the galaxy, this one learning to be a hero rather than a tyrant. It's a risk, Picard admitted to Clark later in the Enterprise's observation lounge. He could relapse. Could decide that domination is easier than redemption. He could, Clark agreed. But he won't. I'll make sure of it. Because if I can help someone as far gone as he was find their way back to the light, then maybe this universe isn't so different from mine after all. Flinched, Clark moved. Not to attack. To grab. He seized his counterpart and flew, straight up, accelerating through atmosphere, through the ionosphere, into the cold of space where there were no bystanders, no collateral damage, no innocents to protect. Just two Kryptonians and the question of what power really meant. They fought among the stars with the Enterprise bearing witness. Picard watched, his crew silent, as the battle unfolded in ways sensors could barely track. Heat vision exchanges that lit up the darkness. Grappling at velocities that turned both figures into blurs. Each impact releasing energy equivalent to antimatter detonations. But slowly, incrementally, something changed. The corrupted Superman began to slow. Not from injury, Kryptonian healing was handling that. But from something else. Exhaustion born not from physical exertion but from the constant, draining effort of fighting someone who refused to hate him. Every time the dark Superman struck to kill, Clark deflected to disable. Every ruthless attack met a defensive counter that protected without destroying. It was infuriating. Incomprehensible. And gradually, devastatingly effective. Because the corrupted Superman had built his power on rage and dominance. On the belief that might made right, that the strong ruled the weak, that mercy was weakness. Clark's existence proved him wrong. Why won't you kill me? The dark Superman finally screamed, frustration breaking through his contempt. You could. I can feel it, you have the power. End this. Because you're me, Clark replied, blocking another strike. A version of me who made different choices, yes, but still me. And I don't kill if I can possibly avoid it. Especially not myself. Then you're a fool. Maybe. But I'm a fool who's going to keep fighting you, keep stopping you, keep protecting people from you for as long as it takes. And if you can't? Clark's expression hardened. Then I'll do what's necessary. But I have to try first. That's what Superman does. Picard nodded slowly. You've learned a great deal since arriving, Mr. Kent. About this universe, about politics and compromise, about operating within systems rather than outside them. But you've also taught us something. What's that? That principles matter more than protocols. That sometimes the right choice is the one that looks foolish or dangerous on paper but proves wise in practice. That power, when wielded with genuine compassion, can inspire rather than oppress. Picard smiled. You've reminded us of why we formed the Federation in the first place. To be better. To reach for ideals that seem impossible. To believe that exploration and diplomacy and hope can triumph over fear and conflict. Through the window, space stretched infinite and beautiful. Somewhere out there, the Romulans were undoubtedly plotting. The Borg were adapting. Threats both known and unknown waited in the darkness between stars. But here, on the USS Enterprise, two beings from different realities worked alongside a crew dedicated to exploration, discovery, and the radical notion that the future could be better than the past. Clark Kent had arrived in this universe by accident, powerless to prevent it, uncertain of his place or purpose. Now, weeks later, he stood as Superman, not the Superman of his home reality, but the Superman this universe needed. One who understood that heroism meant more than strength. That justice required wisdom as well as power. That hope was a choice made daily in the face of darkness. Captain, he said quietly, what's our next assignment? Picard checked his command PADD. Deep space exploration. Charting unknown systems in Sector 221G, routine survey work, mostly. Though in my experience, routine rarely stays that way for long. Good, Clark said with a slight smile. I could use some routine. Maybe learn to work within your systems instead of around them. Become the kind of hero this universe needs instead of just the one I used to be. You're already becoming that hero, Mr. Kent. Every choice you make, every life you save, every principle you refuse to compromise, you're defining what Superman means here. And I, for one, am honored to serve alongside you. As the Enterprise turned toward unknown space, toward new discoveries and inevitable challenges, Clark felt something settle in his chest. Not quite home, that was forever lost, a universe away, but something close. Purpose. Belonging. The knowledge that even stranded millions of light years from everything familiar, he could still make a difference. Could still be Superman. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. In the cargo bay, Kal, the corrupted Superman working to become better. Practiced restraint under Data's patient tutelage, learning to measure his strength, to value life over dominance. In sickbay, the 7 freed board drones continued their recovery, each one a testament to the possibility of redemption. On the bridge, the crew prepared for their next mission, confident that whatever they faced, they had more than advanced technology and tactical expertise. They had hope in the form of a man who could move planets but chose instead to move hearts. They had Superman. And in a universe of infinite darkness and infinite light, that made all the difference.